Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Powerful Women Conference for 2022. I'm Katie Jackson and I'm the chair of Powerful Women. And I'm really delighted to be hosting our 5th annual conference and my first since I took over as chair in April. And I think it's fantastic to look out here and see so many faces and to be back in person. And it's also really good personally to be at an event where the queue for the ladies' toilets is longer than the queue for the men's toilets. So lovely to see all your faces. And last year, of course, the conference was held entirely online, but we're going to do what I think many of us do in our day-to-day lives today and practice a hybrid event. So whilst we have all these good people in the room here at BEIS today, we also have about 400 people who are joining remotely through the live stream. So I think it's really impressive attendance, and it's great to see you all both here in the room, but also online. And thank you to BEIS and to the department for hosting us here again, and for all the support that they give to Powerful Women through the year. So we have a great conference agenda here today, full of inspiring speakers, new ideas, and hopefully we'll get a challenging debate on this year's theme, which is, and it's up here, I think, how the energy sector can build inclusive cultures and deliver on diversity goals. And I think we want to know and to talk about how to turn those words into action. We all know the why of better diversity. It leads to better performance, more innovation, and so on. But how do we accelerate the delivery of actual results from the very welcome commitments that are being made by many of the companies in our sector? How do we ensure that diversity policies actually work for women? And how do we create truly inclusive cultures that allow them to thrive so that we have the talent that the sector needs for the challenges and the opportunities of the energy transition, which are so great? So in this morning's plenary, we'll be hearing from speakers including energy company CEOs and business and diversity experts on female representation in the UK energy sector and why it remains so low and how we can change this. They'll explore how companies can build more inclusive cultures, deliver on their diversity policies, and they'll share some examples of what works, but also some of the challenges. We'll also be hearing and learning from other sectors who've made positive progress. And I'm hoping for honest and enlightening conversations. I'm also delighted to say that we have a keynote address from Sarah, who's over there against the wall, who's the permanent secretary here at BEIS. Then this afternoon, after the live stream ends, we'll be running some in-person speed mentoring sessions over lunch with 5 inspiring female role models. And that's something that's been hugely popular at previous events and sounds not only beneficial, but fun. So please enjoy that. And thanks to Ruth Kearney, Anelia Foster-Turner, Lamo Vere, Nina Skoropska, and Frances Morris-Jones for being our speed mentors. Please do take advantage of their experience and insights. So after lunch, there's a selection of practical and interactive workshops. And in choosing the topics to run the workshops on, we reached out to our network at Powerful Women and asked what they wanted to hear about and what was important for them. And so we've got workshops on allyship, inclusive leadership, intersectionality, how to hold difficult conversations, which I think goes much broader than just this topic, and cultivating female talent in middle management, which is, I think, of particular interest to me because it explores some of the recommendations of our research earlier this year with Bain & Company. So I hope most of you have already decided which workshop to attend, but if you haven't, then please speak to a member of the Powerful Women team during the break. And just so you know who those people are, Georgina, Anna, and Grace, can you just give a wave? So I can see Anna at the back, Grace down here, and Georgina is somewhere. And thank you to STEPS, PDT Global, D&I consultant Peter Duff, Simon Fanshawe of Diversity by Design and a Powerful Women board member, along with Frances Gugan and Elizabeth Baxter for running the sessions, all of which sound brilliant. So this conference has become the forum for UK energy companies and their leaders to engage with peers, key influencers, and women working in the industry to discuss gender diversity and inclusion issues. And I really encourage all of you to use today as an opportunity to contribute, to learn, to share your experiences, and to take back insights and practical actions to your organization. I'm really looking forward to today. I'm looking forward to sharing an enjoyable and inspiring event with all of you, and to chatting to many of you throughout the day. And for those of you who can, please stay and enjoy our drinks reception afterwards, which is at 4:30 straight after the event. And now, so before we get started, as you can imagine, I have a list of housekeeping points to run through, so bear with me, these are important. I think the first one, actually building on my last comment, is please get involved. This event should be as interactive as absolutely possible. So join in with the discussions, with questions, with comments. There's going to be a microphone roving around the room, so you can ask questions from in here. And if you're online, please use Slido to post questions. And I think there's a link to Slido in the chat online. Social media. If you're on social media, please tweet. And I was thinking about saying that. Do we still tweet? I'm not sure if we still tweet. If you still tweet, no matter which alias you use, please tweet. And share on LinkedIn, tagging powerful women and using our conference hashtag, which is PfWConf. And that, I think, will be on some of the slides later on, so you'll see it as a reminder. There is Wi-Fi to enable all of that tweeting. To connect to Wi-Fi, there are 3 free Wi-Fi networks provided by BEIS. So there's BEIS Guest Wi-Fi, Trade Wi-Fi, Gov Wi-Fi, and apparently you can access them all, you just need to register. And this year, you might have noticed we're not giving out goodie bags. And we've decided, instead of producing goodie bags, to make an equivalent donation to a UK charity called Smart Works, which provides women with clothes for job interviews. And I think it's an absolutely fantastic initiative. It helps to give confidence to women to reach their full potential, to get employment, and to really take control and change their own lives. So if you'd like to add your own donation too, then details are on, I think, some of the tables outside. And also there's a link to SmartWorks online. In terms of safety, there's no fire alarm scheduled for today. So if the fire alarm does sound, it's real, and we need to be informed by the BEIS staff as to whether we need to evacuate. The fire exits are clearly marked, I can see over there. And the assembly point is outside Westminster Abbey. There's no smoking on the premises. And of course, if you see any suspicious bags, please flag that to a member of the conference centre staff immediately. As you can see by the flashes, we have 2 photographers with us today, so Steve and Tanya, and just let them know if you don't want to be photographed, otherwise the flashes will continue. If you'd only like really good photographs, which is what I'd like, that's more difficult to achieve, I think. And after the conference, the recordings of all of the morning sessions are going to be available on the Powerful Women YouTube site. So we'll post links on LinkedIn and Twitter, and please share with colleagues afterwards. Finally, a big thank you to the conference sponsors for this year: BP, Centrica, EDF, Drax, National Grid, Scottish Power, SSE and Subsea 7. Your support is invaluable, so thank you. And now, as I said earlier, I'm delighted that we're joined by the Permanent Secretary here at BEIS, Sarah Munby. So Sarah became Permanent Secretary in July 2020, having joined BEIS the previous year as Director General Business Sectors. Sorry, making a hash of that. I'm making a hash of that because Sarah and I were just talking about her job before coming into the civil service, which was working at McKinsey, where she led their strategy and corporate finance practice in the UK and Ireland. And she worked with some of the UK's largest companies to change their strategic direction, and led much of McKinsey's work on productivity across the UK economy. I think also just a word about BEIS, because BEIS has always been a really strong advocate for powerful women. And in fact, we grew out of the department when we were founded by Baroness Verma and Laura Sanders in 2014. And I think the government's continued support and commitment to D&I is really welcome from our perspective. So Sarah, thank you very much for coming to join us this morning. And over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Katie. You mentioned the opportunities and challenges of the energy transition. And in thinking about what I might talk about today, I went back to what I talked about 2 years ago when this conference was online. I was quite a new permanent secretary then. I was a sort of few months in role. I remember being asked at the very beginning, is this still inside your first 100 days? And I talked about the opportunities and challenges of the energy transition. But I looked back at what I said, and it was like 95% opportunities and maybe 5% challenges. I think the word I used most often in that speech was opportunities. And 2 years later, I look back, there's a video of it on YouTube, and I think, oh, you sweet summer child. Because I have to tell you, from my seat, it's felt like quite a lot of challenges over the last couple of years. I don't think any of the opportunities have gone away. The focus on innovation, the opportunity to build new jobs and industries, help the country level up, all of that is still there. But I did look back and wonder why I hadn't thought more about the challenges that we might be facing. And so I wanted to start there, actually. I wanted to start by saying, I think it's been a pretty tough period. It certainly felt like a pretty tough period sitting at the heart of energy policy for the UK. We talk about the energy trilemma, trying to be decarbonised, secure and affordable at the same time, and how we manage those different goals. I think 2 years ago, I didn't really feel the trilemma-ishness of that trilemma. People talk about the horns of the dilemma. I'm not quite sure what you have with a trilemma. It's some sort of horrible three-horned animal. And kind of sitting on those horns has felt very real in the face of challenges to the security of our energy supply. That's something I've been spending a lot of time on recently, in the face of really severe challenges to affordability, and watching friends, families and colleagues struggle to pay for energy. In the face of challenges on decarbonisation too, that agenda remains as critical as ever. And we've just finished COP27 with phrases like life support still being used. So I don't think anything has got a lot easier, and quite a lot has got really tougher. But like often in life, the flip side of something being really tough is that it's really important. And it's been really noticeable, again, sort of taking the moment to reflect back on the last 2 years of my life. It's been really noticeable, the increased focus, attention, support around the world of energy in government policy. And I think the same has to be true right across the country. Certainly everyone has an opinion about energy policy now, not just people in the industry, but people right across the UK and indeed across the globe. What I used to enjoy a little bit, the sort of sense of a very large niche, but nevertheless a niche, a club, a sense of a collective expertise that now is something for all comers to be interested in. And there's a really big reason why that is, because it's all become more important. Energy has always been a critical underpinner of the way that we live. And that's been made very real to us over the last year. The decarbonisation journey remains critical, of course. But on top of that, from a governmental point of view, the work that we do on energy has become an incredibly important part of our welfare policy, how we support the poorest in society. Energy has become an ever more important part of our economic policy. It's one of the biggest challenges facing most businesses across the UK today. It's also, by the way, become an enormously important tool of foreign policy and security policy as we think about playing on the international stage, both the opportunities of the energy transition, but also the very real challenges emerging from Russia's war on Ukraine. So it's really tough, but it is unbelievably important. And that ultimately underpins the conversations that we're having today. Because when you have something tough and important, talent and leadership are utterly critical. And the energy sector needs and deserves no less than the very, very best. And to me, that is why the conversations that you're going to be having today are so critical, not just for people who work in the energy sector, but for what is a national effort and a national mission. But I do worry a bit, because when you have something that's very tough and very important, it's easy to reach for people who look tough and important. And there's lots of evidence that says that when people reach for leaders who look tough and important, they have a certain idea in mind of what they're reaching for. And it doesn't look quite like most of the faces that I see in front of me today. It also doesn't look very much like me. And we know that progress on this agenda, it's going in the right direction, but it's too slow. And I worry about backsliding. And I worry about backsliding because when it's tough and important, people go, what looks tough and important? What feels safe? What is what we know? And so I want to make sure that today we are really focusing not on that, but we're focusing on the kind of leadership that you need in these difficult times. I want to focus on flexibility. The fact that we need to be prepared to change quickly. Nothing has been more clear over the last year or so than that. The need to be able to respond to circumstance. We need to be challenging. We need teams at the board, leadership, and every level below that who are really prepared to have difficult conversations, to ask the important questions about whether we are really doing enough on every part of the agenda. And teams that look all the same don't have tough conversations in the way that we want them to. Flexibility, challenge, and of course, resilience. We all need to be able to keep going in the face of uncertainty and in the face of obstacles. I was reflecting that we've all been dealing with a lot of uncertainty caused by the external environment. I know we sometimes put more uncertainty onto you on top of that. We do try not to. Managing uncertainty, managing difficulty, personal resilience and resilience of our teams. I think there are some pretty resilient people in this room, women who have entered an industry that hasn't been doing enough and hasn't been as welcoming as it needs to be and must be in order to secure everything that we've been talking about. So flexibility, challenge, resilience, this is what we need from our energy leaders in this moment now. And diversity and inclusivity and greater leadership roles for women in particular have got to be a critical underpinner of that. So I told you that I looked back at what I said 2 years ago, and I did think there was one thing that was really worth repeating, which is I said that in thinking about the energy transition and the changes that the sector and companies right across the sector need to make, a lack of women in the senior team is the canary in the coal mine for companies who are not changing fast enough. And I think that that has become only more true, because we're not just looking for a long-term change and the capturing of the opportunities from the energy transition. We're looking for teams that can be flexible and resilient to meet today's very real challenges. And so I think women and the presence of women in those senior teams is still and remains the canary in the coal mine for companies who are not doing enough and who are not embracing that change fast enough or at the right scale. So I'm really proud to have you back in the building. It's great to have you all here physically in BEIS. It's wonderful, as you say, to look over an audience of a hell of a lot of women. Welcome. I hope you have a really, really fabulous day. And I'm looking forward to hearing about the results of your conversations. This is a collective mission. It's a collective mission for everybody right across the industry, government and beyond. And it's a critical one. It's a critical one, not just for the sector, but for the country. And dare I say it, I think this is a forum in which one can say this without exaggeration, ultimately for the world. So please have a wonderfully successful day and do have some fun along the way.
Thank you, Sarah. I think those were some really, really well-chosen words. I'm sure that when you look back on those, as I hope you will do when you come and speak to us again in a couple of years' time, hopefully you will have played up the challenge and downplayed the opportunity when you look back in 2 years' time. But I think, no, some really good sentiments there to start us off in terms of both the fundamental importance of energy and the real need to harness, all the talent that we can to solve some of the pretty substantive challenge that we're all dealing with at the moment. But also then the idea of diversity being the canary in the coal mine in terms of an industry that can be nimble and can adapt to that change. So thank you so much, and really appreciate you coming and being here in person with us this morning. And I think now, before I start speaking again, we're actually going to play our Powerful Women video to give a flavour to start us off. So over to you, Grace, who is in charge of all technical things. What a great video. Unfortunately, I think it says basically everything I have to say, but in a much slicker and sort of 2-minute format. So I'm afraid just, hold on to your horses. It's going downhill for a little bit before it goes up again. No, but it's excellent. And I thought actually, before I dig in maybe to a few of the statistics that the video showed, and talk a little bit more about powerful women and what we're trying to do, that I would also just touch on, because I'm still new to the organization and new to the role of chair, why this means so much to me. Because, I'm a woman who spent her whole career in the energy industry. So I started in 1994, so I'm coming up to 30 years in this industry. And I think a bit to what Sarah was talking about, I have always found this such an incredibly purposeful place to work. I have always felt that what we do is so important. It impacts people's lives. It impacts the world around us. I have a huge kind of sense of motivation and purpose every day that I go to work. But despite having worked in many different companies in the industry and also in quite a lot of different geographies, I am still surprised daily how little progress we have made on diversity over my career. And what really prompted me to think again about what I could do to help that was, I have worked for a lot of different companies. And I was at BG when BG got taken over by Shell. I had started in industry at Shell in 1994. So when that takeover came, it was 2016. So 22 years since I started, found myself back in Shell. And there's nothing like rejoining a company to make you think, how does this look? How did this look to my 21-year-old self when I joined in 1994? How does this look to my somewhat older self in 2016? I think when I joined first in 1994, I just presumed that over my lifetime, over my working lifetime, the industry would change to be a place where the workforce was 50-50. I'd always found energy a really interesting place to be. I'd had fantastic opportunities. I just presumed that we would manage to attract and retain women and the workforce would gradually move. And I think that was when I went back into Shell at 2016, in 2016, the penny sort of dropped for me that actually that hadn't really happened. And actually there had been some progress, but fundamentally my workplace, my colleagues didn't look a huge amount different from when I started back in 94. And I kind of felt that really, I bear some responsibility in this too. I'm a senior leader. I have to say my team does not look like that, just for the record. And I really feel that it is about having a more serious conversation about getting leaders on board, about really challenging companies and making sure that the progress over the next version of me's career is much more impactful than it has been over mine. And so I think Powerful Women has been doing a fantastic job. I guess I'm a bit techie, but the idea of following the data, looking at the numbers, trying to both encourage and challenge the industry to do more seems to me to be, really the right approach. And so that's what spurred me to get more involved and take on the chair role. And I think to Sarah's point about pace of change, I think that's the thing that I hope to work with, every single one of you in this room and also online, how can we actually get more tangible progress and get the next level of impact. So that's a bit about me. I think maybe just a bit about Powerful Women. So if we go on to the slides, I think we are working for a gender balanced, diverse and inclusive energy sector in the UK. And we were formed in 2014 because frankly, we weren't then and we probably aren't now. And there, in 2014, there was a very significant underrepresentation of women in the industry, particularly in senior leadership roles, so particularly in board level roles. And that's why we spend a lot of time focusing on what the composition of the executive directors and non-executive directors look like. And I think it is a bit back to Sarah's comments around making sure that we are having the right conversations in rooms taking really important decisions, and making sure that we don't have a lot of people who all look like each other. So how are we doing? And it's clear, I think there is progress, but there is still a lot of work to do. And I'm sure I hope you've seen this one before, but the light pink is women in all board seats, so exec and non-exec, in the UK energy sector. The darker red is the women in executive director seats. And if I go back to 2015, which is when we started producing data on this, it's worth noting that back in 2015, only 5% of executive director seats and 11% of overall board seats were occupied by women. So in 7 years, we've gone from 5 to 15% for exec directors and 11 to 27 for women on boards in general in the energy industry. But you can see it's still quite a long way off the target, both the Powerful Women target, but also the FTSE target. And so just a couple of points, these flashed up in the video, but it's just worth taking a step back on some of these. These numbers come from the annual State of the Nation statistics that we put together with PwC and that we roll out each year in June. And they cover the top 80 energy companies in the UK, which are basically the most significant employers in our sector. And I think it's pretty disappointing in 2022 to see that nearly a quarter, so 23% of those 80 companies have all male boards. Which I think is something that's completely disappeared from the rest of the FTSE 350, or from the FTSE 350. And also that 75% of companies don't have female executive directors. And given, I think, the importance of the energy industry, but also the challenges that we face, the triple challenges of energy security, energy affordability, and climate change, the diversity of skills and innovation and leadership we need to get to net zero, and the need that we have to engage with a really diverse customer base, it just doesn't really seem good enough that we are making such, I think the previous slide said glacial progress, and I think that's a fair statement. And then if we look a bit broader, and I really like the fact that today we're going to look outside energy to other sectors, this shows how we compare to other UK sectors. And you can see that there are some other sectors that really are much further advanced in diversity than we are. And on the left-hand side, you can see how we compare to the FTSE 100 and FTSE 250 in terms of women on boards, FTSE 100 at 39%, FTSE 250 at 37%. And both, I think, meeting and exceeding the original 33% target, which was set by Hampton-Alexander for 2020, and also the FTSE almost getting to the new target, which is 40% by 2025. And actually, I think comparing really well on international metrics as well. So I think the FTSE is actually the second in the international league table, whereas in energy, we're still behind at 27%. So on the other hand, turning the frustration into a positive, I think the FTSE has managed to make a threefold increase in women on boards over the last 10 years, and they've gone from 12.5%. So it can be done. And I think we are on track to keep moving this upwards, but the question is, what can we do to increase the pace? So it's really important that we listen to what women in the energy industry are saying. And this is some of the quotes from the Women in Energy Annual Global Study, which is something that Powerful Women were really pleased to partner again with for the 2022 edition. And it's also published together with Ness Firecroft and Energy Jobline. And this is a global survey, and they talked to about 2,500 energy professionals. And I think it gives a really authentic voice of women in the sector. And there's some pretty powerful messages here for recruiters, for HR professionals, and for companies who want to attract and retain female talent. And I was particularly struck by 61%. I'm considering leaving my current role within the next 1 to 2 years. And basically, what the takeaways for me anyway from this survey are that women are excited by energy, particularly working on things related to climate change and net zero. But they are struggling. They're struggling to maintain life-work balance. They're struggling to get the progress they want in their careers. And there is quite a big risk of talent departing companies in the sector. And so what they say is that they need more flexible working. They need better learning and training and better sponsorship in doing that, and better parental leave. And importantly, better parental leave, both for women, but also for men. We've done our own research also on the UK, focused on mid-career barriers, because underrepresentation of women really spikes in mid-career, and it's a pinch point where women encounter a lot of barriers to progression, which in turn has a big impact on how many women manage to progress into the leadership level. And so earlier this year, we published a report together with BEIS that revealed some of the experience of women in middle management in the UK sector. And I think some of the big points were that whilst we've got D&I workplace policies and programs in place, they really aren't being used by women in the way that we would expect them to. So there is a delivery gap in terms of what the policies are versus the uptake. There's also still an unsupportive culture in our sector that holds women back, and female talent is being lost or at least discouraged. So the report set out recommendations for actions by companies, by leaders and managers in how they can cultivate more female talent and keep the female talent that they have in their organization. And I think this is a big priority for us at Powerful Women. And we feel we really need to make progress in this area so that we get talented women staying in the sector, having fulfilling careers, and being able to progress to more senior levels if they want to. So there are big challenges to address, and it requires big ambition. And so I'm pleased to be able to announce today that we have a new strategy and a new target for Powerful Women. We're combining our current middle management and executive director targets into a more ambitious 40% by 2030 target for women in all leadership roles, including the board. And we all hope that this single 40 by 30 target will help drive faster progress and more focus. Powerful Women are going to continue to work to support this target by doing 3 things. So we will support, we will challenge, and we will connect. We'll continue to support women in their own career development through mentoring, and provide practical support to companies to achieve their commitments, sharing good practice, research, and recommendations. We will challenge performance and policies, and we'll keep reporting data every year and sharing useful analysis, and also campaigning with other organizations and initiatives. And we'll continue to connect people and organizations like I hope we are doing today, through events, social media, working groups, and networks, so we can all learn and share and collaborate. So I'm really looking forward to working with all of you to take our new strategy forward. And I think it's great that our mission is supported by the leaders of some of the largest and most significant employers in the energy sector. And this shows the logos of the Energy Leaders Coalition, the ELC, which is the UK heads of 16 companies and the CEOs of the regulators, Ofgem and the North Sea Transition Authority. And I think it represents a really powerful commitment from the most senior level of our industry to better diversity and inclusion within their own companies and within the sector as a whole. And today, alongside launching our new targets, we're also launching their 4th annual report, where they're committing to aligning with our higher ambition and targets, and also committing to continuing to publish their data so that they're accountable for progress, and specifically addressing the barriers that women are facing at middle management. And this is oh, no, we've lost it. This is not what I was expecting, but that's okay. Seamless. So, I mean, I was talking at the beginning about what this means to me and how important I think leadership is in terms of really moving us forward and also increasing the pace of change. And I think powerful and visible leadership like we get from the ELC is really, for me, at the heart of actually succeeding. So the report is available to download from our website today, and I think there's even a QR code in the room and some hard copies. And just a couple of insights as to what's in there. And we're not quite there yet, but we will be in a minute. We've tracked and published the 16 companies' progress against their own diversity and inclusion targets. And I think it's great that the companies have got more granular and are more measurable in terms of their progress this year. And there's a lot of strong ambition. All of them are currently on track to meet targets in the next few years, and some have already achieved them. There's room for improvement, but I think it's just the level of granularity and measurement is very welcome. We also give an update on where each company sits compared to the industry-wide targets already mentioned. And 6 out of the 16 ELC companies have met our old Powerful Women target for 30% executive director roles by 2030. 10 out of the 16 have already achieved the FTSE Women Leaders target for women on boards of 40% by 2025, and 5 out of the 16 have achieved both. So progress, but I think still clearly lots of work to be done, particularly when it comes to getting women into leadership roles. And that brings us on to this slide, which is looking, oh no. I was just back on track, which talks about the executive pipeline. And I think a key part of getting women into leadership roles is making sure that we have the healthy development pipeline to feed through into greater representation at the top tables. So we're also in the ELC annual report looking at how the pipelines look. And the executive pipeline we're talking about here is defined as the executive committee and all of their direct reports. So it's 1 and 2 levels below the board. And this shows that on the right, for the 16 ELC members, 32% of those roles are held by women, compared to 29% for the energy sector as a whole. And so I think it's great to see the ELC leading here. They're about on par with the FTSE 100 and doing better than the FTSE 250. And hopefully having a really strong pipeline will result in pull through to the next level. The report also has a lot of case studies in it. I think that's also a very good piece of transparency, because it helps us to see which actions are actually making a difference. There is, in terms of things that work, there's a strong focus on inclusion, both in terms of workplace environments and leadership, but also in terms of hiring practices and how we sponsor people through organizations. So picking out a couple of examples that are in the report, there's one case study of a sponsorship program that a company employed to develop female talent that's resulted in 36% of the women that have been through the program getting promoted. There's another company that's reviewed their recruitment communications, which has led to more than half their job offers being made to women in a 3-month period. And there's another company that looked at hiring standards and focused on how hiring managers behaved, that also led to a really significant increase in the number of women joining at senior level. So I would encourage you to have a look at the report. There are lots of good examples of things that companies are doing that are actually working in there. And I think whilst there's more to do, of course, to shift the statistics and achieve a step change, that kind of sharing of focused and data-led examples is really, really useful. So thank you. I hope that some of the D&I leads from the ELC companies who contributed those case studies are in the room today or online. Thank you very much for all the effort to provide the insights. So what's next for the ELC? So this year, I think the ELC spent a lot of time discussing and really responding to the research that we at Powerful Women had conducted on what it is like to be a woman in middle management in the energy industry. And they signed a commitment to try and address some of the barriers that they face and do more to keep and cultivate female talent at that level. And next year, I think they're going to focus more on how they embed some of the recommendations that I talked about and how they report on progress in terms of removing some of those barriers. Come back. We're also in 2023 at the ELC going to look at how we can attract more women into our sector. And so we're going to run, or the ELC are going to run a joint marketing campaign to help on that. And finally, we're hoping and anticipating support for our new ambition targets and strategies. So 40 by 30 and the next and a faster pace to get to a gender balanced, diverse and inclusive workforce. So finally, it's good. I think it's good to finish on an upbeat note. I started talking a little bit about how purposeful I feel my job in energy is. And I think as a reminder, women do find our sector exciting, vital, and an inspiring place to work. And I think that despite all the challenge that Sarah touched on that's been facing our industry this year, the triple crisis of affordability, security and climate, it is great to see, the continued support for the ELC and that energy leaders are continuing to focus on diversity and inclusion. And I think we really do need that focus because to have a successful, affordable and just energy transition to net zero, we really need to engage our customers. We need to have the very best people and skills to create opportunity out of that challenge, and getting more diverse talent and cultivating the talent that we already have is a huge part of that. But the data does show that we're not making fast enough progress. And so I think we all need to step up our efforts to see if we can indeed increase the speed of progress in the year ahead. So that is all from me, but I'm now delighted to hand over to our first panel of the day, which has a fantastic lineup of experts and influencers on diversity and inclusion from across business. And I think also for the first time this year, it's a session dedicated to hearing about D&I initiatives and hopefully successes from sectors outside of energy. And hopefully we can learn from some of the insights and examples that they're going to share with us. So Lorraine Martins is going to moderate the session. There you are. So welcome, Lorraine. And Lorraine is the Global Director for Equity, Diversity and Inclusion at Nichols Group, and she's also a board member at Powerful Women. So over to you, and thanks, Lorraine.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So I guess the people online could hear me, but it was more challenging for you here. And my dulcet tones are much better when they're amplified, aren't they? So thank you very much. I'm Lorraine Martins. I'm really proud to be here moderating this conversation. I'm going to introduce the panel momentarily, put my glasses on so I can read my script. And before I do that, I'd like to introduce a short message from Liv Garfield, CBE, who's the Chief Exec of Severn Trent, and who is one of the leading business women in the UK. So Liz couldn't join us today, but she has taken time to send us a video message, and I'll just outline a little bit about her bio. She joined Severn Trent in 2014, before which she was the CEO of Openreach, where following a number of pivotal roles with the company, she spearheaded the commercial rollout of broadband, fibre broadband, over 2/3 of the country. And before that, Liv worked for Accenture as a consultant, designing and implementing business change solutions across a number of industry sectors. Liv was appointed CBE in 2020 for services to the water industry. Among her other positions, she's a non-exec director of Water UK, CEO of the Council for Sustainable Business, and a member of the UK Investment Council and the 30% Club, which is a group of business leaders campaigning to increase gender diversity on boards and senior management. So let's have our message from Liv.
Hello, I'm Liv Garfield, Chief Executive of Severn Trent Water, and I'm so gutted not to be there today. I'm afraid that today is our annual results presentation, so I'm currently right now tied up doing media or doing discussions with investors, which means I can't be with all of yourselves, but I desperately want to be involved by recording a video. I am absolutely passionate that really good organisations can only exist if they have an inclusive workforce. I think inclusivity is the bedrock of something that makes for a really successful organisation. Now, what do I mean by that? What does it mean to me? I mean creating an atmosphere at work where every single person can come to work and be the best they can be. In order to be the best you can be, you've got to be you. You can't take some fake work persona to work. You've got to take the real you. And the real you has got to bring with you any thoughts you have and all of your natural diversity. I think really great workforces are made up of the most diverse set of opinions. So whether that's gender, whether that's race, whether that's your age, whether that's just your experiences in life, whether it's the social mobility in terms of how life started for you, it kind of all adds up together to give really different views. And I love workforces that actually are curious, where people feel that they're actually inspired towards asking different questions, bringing different opinions, and then debating it all, and that melange of all of that difference actually coming into something really special. Now, I was asked to bring to life what I thought were a few examples of how I tried to bring that into different organisations I'd worked in, things that we'd done that had worked, that might be useful for anybody else in the room today. So I've got 3 examples, and hopefully they spark an idea. I always believe that's the greatest thing about conferences, is just something spark an idea that you take back and do something different with. So the first of my ideas then is we all think we can put ourselves in other people's shoes, and I like to believe I'm quite good at being empathetic at considering different people's opinions, but that's different from having lived somebody else's experience. And so the first thing that I've done recently in the last couple of years that has made a massive difference to my outlook and to my senior teams is that we actually realised we needed more, almost like reverse mentoring. So we have some brilliant different advisory groups in Severn Trent, groups that actually try and bring different voices to the fore. And I realised actually I needed was to spend time having a reverse mentor where I was the learner and they were the teacher, and they would bring to life their actual day-to-day experiences. And I set that up, so whether it was from the ethnicity working group, I had a fantastic mentee there. Whether it's from the LGBTQ+ working group, a brilliant mentee there. And likewise, from the disabilities team. And what they were able to share with me is, okay, things that I thought I would have known, but different experiences that I just realised I just need to embrace things in a different manner. So that's the first of things that I've done that I think can make a real difference towards the workforce being more inclusive. The second thing is taboo subjects. So the big one that we lent into was menopause. Now, if you get into the kind of age group that I am, then I guess you're in that stage of life when actually things you never really understood. And considering 50% of the workforce is female in the UK, we've got to make menopause much more of an acceptable topic. We've got to get ourselves into a situation where it's not embarrassing to say the word. Having a bit of a hot flush doesn't feel like you're somehow not able to mention it. And so we ended up where we did menopause training for every single first-line manager. And of course, you've got a whole range of ages of managers, so it might be a bit more embarrassing for kind of like a 22-year-old boy that suddenly is kind of being trained on the menopause, but people embraced it. And we embraced it as a senior team. We really went after it in terms of just saying the word, explaining stuff, being honest, laughing about symptoms, just really thinking that actually this shouldn't be embarrassing. This is what every woman is going to go through. How can that be embarrassing to not talk about? The third of the tips, I would say, in terms of creating an inclusive workforce is around looking for those footprints. People often need the ability to see somebody that's achieved something ahead of them. And so if you're trying to create a workforce that truly represents the communities in which you live and serve, you need more people that represent all of those communities. And we realised we needed to fast track talent, we needed to look at ourselves and say, let's shine the light on case studies. So it's about really making sure that when someone is doing something truly wonderful, let's really talk about it. We had a wonderful colleague, as an example, that actually designed a headscarf that she could wear under PPE to be able to go out on site. Lovely young lady, 22 years old. She joined as an apprentice and she created that off her own bat. We then backed her to the hilt. We put it into our PPE offering. We made sure that every site, every store could have it. She's then won a load of awards with it because actually it just needed one woman working operations to realise there was something missing for everybody else to be able to learn from, and she sees that and has made it the norm across utilities. That is a really special situation, and we created the right environment for that situation. So the last comment I'll leave you with is that in order to keep ourselves fresh, in order to keep that inclusivity, one of the things we've got to keep doing is embrace a couple of targets. And I originally wasn't sure we needed targets in this area, and I've totally changed my opinion. Actually, it's been really good just to help us show the progress. Not because targets make you change, but because targets show that small steps are being achieved. So we set ourselves the ambition to represent the communities in which we live and serve, that we want our workforce to be demographically representative. So that means, of course, if there are 49% of the Midlands are women, we need to really raise our game and set ourselves that long-term ambition to represent that community. And I believe that's actually been really useful for us. We've taken it down by every single sub-area and we're really clear across our patch what would representative be and what more can we do to bring fresh talent in to help us with that ambition. And the very last thing we decided as targets is that you need to keep yourself fresh. So I can remember being a young chief exec at 37. I'm now 47, so I'm not so young. And that sense is actually really important. I need younger, fresher people coming through. So we've decided, regardless of recessions and kind of tricky situations in terms of cost of living, we need to make sure as an organisation we embrace young talent. We act as a beacon, as a natural magnet for kickstarters, for apprentices, for graduates, for work placements. Because all of those people come in, they are brilliant at inclusivity. The younger generation, the brand new generation at school today, are much more inclusive than if you look at the generations that went before them. The more we can have them in our organisation, the more they'll keep us fresh and the more they'll create that wonderful environment where every single person can thrive. I hope that's been helpful. I'm really sorry not to be there in person, but wish me luck. Of course, whatever I'm doing right now, I'll be probably on a media screen, feeling slightly nervous, palpitations. So have a wonderful rest of the event and I look forward to meeting some of you at some stage in the future. Thank you very much.
So that was excellent. And the energy that Liz shared really is a really good fillip for the discussion we're about to have. So hold some of the points, and may I just remind you, if you're online, we've got Slido, so please put your questions on Slido. And to you in the audience, if you have a question, put your hand up and please wait for the mic to reach you, and then we'll get you speaking. But before we do that, let me introduce the panel, and we're going to have a bit of a conversation, then we'll open it up to you on the floor. So if I start with you, Fiona, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Fiona Hathorn. I launched an organisation called Women on Boards UK to support anybody joining the board as part of a career development strategy. We currently work with about 40 different corporates like BP, Scottish Water, BlackRock, JP Morgan, with regard to empowering yourself with knowledge to consciously own and lead your career going forward. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you. My background's asset management. Joined the city in 1986. And, I hadn't realised that there was an issue with women in leadership. Why? Fascinating story. It wasn't until I became an angel investor that I saw what really happened behind closed doors. So that was my light bulb moment, but that's a whole other debate and story.
Yeah, absolutely. And we may slip some of that experience in. And so to you, Ria, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, of course. My name is Ria Johal. My pronouns are she, her. I am a program manager at Amazon, but actually very similar to Fiona, I started out in the investment industry as well. So my background was investment banking before I moved to jump over into the technology sector. I also co-founded a non-profit called Mentor Compass that works with large organizations all the way down to charities and student-led focuses to try and look at the different mentoring opportunities that are available and audit them and talk about the different formats that we can have mentoring to make sure that we're having good communication and our inputs are reaching our outputs. I'm looking at Vanessa now too, because I know this is the point where I also say I was very fortunate this year to win the We Are the City award as a rising star in the technology sector and a top 100 tech woman. So very happy with that one.
Thank you very much, Ria. And Maha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hard to follow those introductions. Hi everyone, my name is Maha Malshura. I'm an associate partner at Bain & Company, and I work in the energy sector. A lot of the work I do is focused on helping organise, transform themselves to lots of transformation work, And to me, this topic is one of those that actually has to be looked at in the same way, has to be led from a transformation lens in a lot of organizations. And worked with the Powerful Women team on the report that's been referenced by Katie, the middle management. And selfishly, a woman in middle management, so I am very, very passionate about this sector and this particular topic.
Thank you, Marham. And last but not least, Vanessa.
So my name's Vanessa Vanelli. I'm CEO and founder of We Are the City, which was set up 14 years ago to provide resources to women that wanted to drive their own careers. Because back in those days, a bit similar to at the moment, 2008, recession coming, personal development was on no one's agenda, excuse me, and nor was gender for that matter. So today We Are the City is around 140,000 women. We're like a mothership for all of the other different women's organisations in different industries. So, for example, we would promote things that the wonderful, powerful women do. So we're supported by 150 different organisations. We do our own events, we do conferences, we do awards, as Ria so nicely mentioned. We cover all sorts of different kind of industries in our awards. So I'm going to get it in now. Do look out in January. There is a Women in Energy Sector award sponsored by National Grid. So I'd love to see some of those nominations. And gentlemen, please do nominate the ladies as well. Number of other strings to my bow, but I'm conscious of time.
Brilliant. Don't worry. We're all right for time at the moment, she said. So thank you very much, Vanessa. We had some really important points from Liv, and we're discussing what does good inclusion and diversity look like, what those cultures look like. But Vanessa, if I kick off with you, why is this important to you? Tell us a little bit more about your story and the drive.
So I think it was very important to me. I grew up in the East End of London. I left school at 16, come from a very kind of socially and economically challenged background. And when I went into the city, there was an element of conscious bias. It wasn't unconscious. It was around my accent, lack of academic education, which I hold my hands up for that. I was busy doing other things when exams were happening. But when I got there, you know, invariably for me, the answer for any job I wanted to work in banking. You know, my careers officer told me I couldn't work in banking. So I was like, I'm going to do that. But the answer was always no. And it was that social mobility kind of thing that kind of got in my way. But I managed to kind of work my way up to a COO position in finance. However, there were a lot of challenges along the way. And I still see today companies, which I don't necessarily agree with, saying, right, let's go and get a load of kids from a challenged area of London. Let's put them in the middle of our organisation where they're not supported. They look up into the organisation. They don't see role models that represent them, their cultures, their background. And for me, that's a recipe for failure. So I think from a social mobility, which is where I come at it, there is a huge amount of talent within those pools. Entrepreneurialism, get my words out today, you know, the ability to get things done, hunger, passion. We are missing a trick. But if we're going to go out and get that talent pool, which we should, we need to make sure that they're supported within the organisations of which we work.
Thank you, Vanessa. And Marham, you mentioned the work that you've done on middle management and as a middle management manager yourself. Would you like to explain a little bit more about why this is an important aspect of diversity and inclusion for you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for me, you know, there has been so much emphasis and focus on a lot of the executive level roles, and Katie referred to it earlier. But actually what we forget is that actually to get to those targets and to meet any of those numbers, we really have to focus on the middle management, the pipeline of women that are coming through. And that is really about how an organization behaves and interacts with the entire population. It's not just about women. Actually, a lot of the findings, and we'll talk about it later, actually apply to everyone. All minorities benefit from putting in good policies in place. And so for me, the reason I'm really passionate about it is because I think if we can start to really move the needle in a lot of those organizations by focusing on that middle management, the targets that we set at executive levels will kind of follow through themselves. But unless we really fix those underlying issues, I think it's really hard to actually start to meet some of those numbers. And that glacial pace that Katie talked about, we won't really tackle that until we, I think, solve some of the underlying issues.
Thank you, Marham. Andrea, why is this important to you? Tell us a little bit more about your story.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of tags on a little bit to the story Vanessa told you there, but I also was someone that was very heavily targeted by diversity recruitment strategies. So when I was at university, I'll just be very honest, there wasn't really an event I didn't go to. I was from a low socioeconomic area. I went to a state school. My mother was a refugee. I have a disability. I'm an ethnic minority, and I was in tech. So I was invited to pretty much have an event. If I'm being honest, and I went. And it's really interesting because I think we'll talk about this as we go along, but a lot of the times when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, it is intersectional and it is cut by different facets. So for me, I didn't have parents that went to university or didn't study subjects I studied. I didn't have parents that had been in the sectors that I wanted to go into. So I believed everyone when I went to those really shiny awards. And you sit there and, you know, there's a panel, lots of this, and then HR sit at the back. So you say what you're told to say and the keynote tells you it's all going to be great. And then you go and start in these organizations and it feels really personal when it doesn't work. And it feels like you're the reason that it didn't work. And so for me, I don't have children yet, but I do have siblings who probably feel like they have 3 parents at this stage. So I always think, particularly back to my sisters, I've got an amazing sister that's 16 and sister that's 13. And it stresses me that the world of work and the mechanisms that we use really aren't that dissimilar than I was 10 years ago. And I don't want them to go through that. So for me personally, I was really fortunate that I made good contacts with the companies and the organizations that used to put on the different events. And I was kindly invited back to talk and find ways that I could commercially, but correctly, educate students and young people on how to advocate for themselves. And so it's been an organic path since then for me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Riaz. And to you, Fiona, why is this important to you? Because you've got a very different story.
Yeah, I mean, it matters to me because leadership matters, and being an effective leader and being consciously inclusive is so difficult. And that means the boardroom matters, because the boardroom can change the leadership and it can set the tone and culture. I'm not saying it's easy. I potentially could have been one of your fabulous female blockers, because if my chief executive 20 years ago had come to me in the city and said, we need some special initiatives for minorities, I probably would have said, what you want about? If you're good enough, you'll get there. I believe that. The question is why? I know I've changed my mind, but that's a different story. And it's because of my father. I didn't realize the impact that my father gave me because I had a strong sense of self. I'm mildly dyslexic. I didn't know that. I was struggling at school and my father wouldn't let me fail. Why wouldn't he? Because he was the first Burslem boy to go to university in Stoke-on-Trent. His father was a miner, and a teacher picked him up at 8 and said, you are clever, we can get you out. We need to give you the knowledge and the support to make you effective at university. So I lucked out by having a mini coach from the age of 8, but I further lucked out because I joined a company, Hill Samuel Asset Management, owned by Lloyds Bank, that had a Yorkshireman put in charge as the chief executive, and he hated the Etonian nature, public school nature of the City of London. And he decided to support any minority in his organisation. So I thought I was good and I thought I was better and I thought I was different. But look at the support I had. And as I say, with an angel investment, I saw what happened behind the closed doors and I saw the lack of capital going to women. That was a light bulb moment to me in 2012 when the government was looking at the lack of women on boards. And why was I a fund manager and why hadn't I noticed? Why? And I think we've all stepped up. Katie talked about stepping up and wanting to step up. So it really means a lot to me.
Brilliant. And if I can build on that, Liv made some really interesting observations about 3 things that worked for her. So the reverse mentoring, talking about taboo subjects, giving greater visibility and opportunity to talent. So in your experience, Fiona, what's worked well?
I'm sort of making a list of what's changed over the last 10 years. You know, 10 years ago, we were struggling persuading people to have targets. We're not now. We have targets for paper consumption. Why wouldn't we have the targets for leadership? We've got employee representative groups that we didn't have before. So companies are doing a lot, but I would say they're running around doing a lot of initiatives, a lot of things. I think companies have recognized now that the hard work is happening. How do we support our leaders being effective? And one of the things that came to me today on a call, I was actually doing a call with a mining company in Australia as it happened at 7 o'clock this morning. It's the Netflix leadership module. When we're providing support for our employees, we now understand intersectionality, we understand choice, and we need to commercialize and customize our offerings to individuals. And that's the dramatic change that I've seen, because I want everyone to know about the boardroom from the age of 4, because my father took me into the boardroom because he had no childcare. But whether you're ready for the boardroom at 4, 10, 12, 14, you're never too young, but the boardroom matters. So having awareness of it. So I see a lot of change, but I see a lot of companies struggling because they're doing so many things. And I think most companies are now realizing we need to support leaders doing the right thing. And was it Liv talking about somebody who's 24, talking about the menopause?
Yes.
You know, that's the level that we need to get to. And that is quite scary for a 24-year-old to take those on, but it matters because we're all individuals. And I think the conversation's changing, and the companies that are doing well are taking on that, and they're giving people toolkits, not just talking about it, on how to be consciously inclusive, which is where we're looking at in terms of future leaders and steps to success.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And Malham, can I turn to you? In your experience and as a consultant, you've worked with a range of different businesses. What's worked well from what you've seen?
So I think I would go back to the data, actually. For me, data is incredibly insightful. And actually, when we look at the findings in the report, there were 4 things that we had identified that work well or don't work well in organisation. The first of those was equal access to professional development. That is things like, does everyone get the opportunity to go for that hypo role, or does everyone get the opportunity for that, to identify those stretch opportunities and find a mentor who's going to be able to give you access to those. It's also things like mentoring, sponsorship. Do we have access to those? And a lot of companies have put policies in place, and rightly so. But as Katie mentioned, there is a delivery gap. The uptake on those is very, very low from what the data shows. And I'll give a personal example, not at Bain, but at a previous company I worked for. Reverse mentoring was actually a policy that was put in place as a woman, ethnic minority. And actually what was really interesting was, I scheduled an interview with this partner and literally rescheduled about 6 or 7 times, after which I kind of gave up, and I didn't think this individual was really interested in learning about my experience. So how those policies are executed on the ground is really important. The second thing was flexibility. So this is about access to flexibility for both men and women. And what we saw in the data was that about 40% of men and women both believe that, flexible opportunities or taking up those flexible opportunities negatively impacts their career. And we really have to change that perception in organizations and show individuals who are successful, who have taken flexible options throughout their career, and you can get there having used those. The third, I think, has been mentioned a couple of times, is visible and accessible role models. It is so incredibly powerful to have women, and it can be men as well, it doesn't have to be women, who display characteristics that you see in the leadership of your team, and say, I could be like this person, therefore I'm going to go for it. And I think that can be really, really powerful. And the last one is sort of the topic of today, which is inclusive culture. But a lot of organizations find that quite an intangible topic. Like, what does that really mean? How do we really tackle it? And I think for me, the thing that really stood out as part of the work that we were doing was that a lot of organizations, as Fiona talked about, there's a lot of new initiatives, a lot of organizations focusing on what are the new things we can do. Often it's not about the new initiative. It's about going back and fixing the basics. I work in energy and I work in utilities a lot with large field force organizations, and one of my clients is here today. And she'll attest to this, is that one of the things I always say is that frontline supervisors in those organizations are the heroes. They are the individuals who can really help accelerate and drive change. But I think that concept applies actually much more broadly in every organization. Frontline managers, they are the individuals we need to tackle and change behavior, because what you see in the inconsistent, the delivery gap is an inconsistent application of those frontline supervisors, who are, some individuals have great experiences. They find a frontline supervisor who really believes in them, and that's it. They set them up, they find the right opportunities, they find the right mentors and sponsors, but not everyone has that. And if you can harness and create a consistent experience for women, ethnic minorities of all, or any kind of minority actually, you can change how those individuals feel within your organization and how they succeed. So for me, it's sort of bit of a monologue, but I think that's what the data highlighted. There's 4 very tactical things actually that organizations can go after, and it doesn't have to be lots of new things. Actually, it can be a lot of going back and re-looking at how well we're doing the existing things that are in place today.
Thank you, Mohan. And Vanessa, what can you add to that?
I agree with Fiona that there's lots of initiatives. People are busy, but we're not necessarily seeing the outcome. I also believe that a lot of perhaps EDI strategies are built in a little bit of an ivory tower, whereby we're not actually looking at the grassroots problems that we have. And some of that involves something that's really, really simple, and it's called talking to the people on the ground. And we don't do it enough. So one of the greatest things, I mean, part of my organisation, we run something called Gender Networks, which brings together all the heads of the women's networks across about 100 different firms, multi-sector. But some of the information that they're getting from their grassroots women is giving them the direction that they need to solve some of the problems. And they're being able to feed that up into D&I heads, into HR, policy challenges and things like that. So I think there's a big thing around listening. It's really interesting actually listening to some of the challenges in this sector. We also run We Are Tech Women, and we've just recently done a piece of research with Ipsos Mori around the barriers women face in tech. And it's not dissimilar. You know, access to role models was the biggest one. And it goes back to my point earlier on, you can't be what you can't see. And if we're not telling the stories of individuals like the 22 or the 24-year-old, or like the woman that's moved jobs, she's come up with something really innovative that's changed the landscape, we need to be telling those stories. But also the fact that these role models need to be accessible, which is another big thing that come up. It's pointless having someone who's a real kind of intersectional woman that's sitting at the top of the organisation that we all aspire to, if she sits behind a glass door and we can't get to her, or she's not being utilised to inspire the rest of the women in the organisation, but the industry. Look at Liz, for example. I mean, she's absolutely incredible. So I just want to finish on one more thing, and that's around sponsorship, which again come out of our research. So there is a thing, sponsorship above mentorship, and I'm very much at that camp, because I think mentors are very, very important. Multiple mentors, different sectors, identifying what skills, mapping your network to help you with some of that. But the ability for someone to open up a door of opportunity for you when you're not in the room is incredible. And that goes in 2 parts. It goes about you having the bravery and being bold enough to articulate what you're good at and what you want without feeling like, you know, you're bragging or boasting. It's about putting yourself out there and silencing that inner imposter. But by articulating that and then having other people go and repeat your aspirations and repeat your stories. If I can just give a couple of examples. Another thing that came out of our research was around male allyship. Now, it's not the case that the men don't want to help, but sometimes it's just articulating what that good looks like. So one quick, a couple of bits that we did in our focus group. There was one lady that just said, you know what, just clearing space in the meeting room so my voice is heard rather than talked over all the time. Just stopping the person who's about to steal my idea and taking it as their own. And there was one gentleman that I had the pleasure of working with, and what he did, he kept observing that his room was full of men, and yet he saw there were other women in the middle layers. So he's like, I'm going to go and find 3 or 4 women that are going to come under my wing, like as a kind of mentorship sort of sponsorship organisation. He spent time with them. He found out their stories. He invited them into his board meetings, walking in with his 4 kind of mentees, sponsorees, and said, these are who these women are. Please introduce yourself. What he did there immediately was expanded those women's networks within a nanosecond. Those gentlemen in that room now knew what the stories of those women were. He then used to give them examples of his work, saying, I'm going into a board meeting. I need to make an informed choice, informed decision based on these papers. You ladies read it, come up with what you think that is the wrong or the right answers. There is no wrong or right. And then I'll tell you what happened in the meeting. So he was giving them, they were living in his shoes. And before you know it, that whole senior leadership team was like, I need to get me some mentees. And it got a little bit competitive, right? But lo and behold, those women started making it up the track. This doesn't cost us any money, you know, so we can't hide behind the fact we've got no budgets, we've got no money. These are just tiny little things. Opening doors of opportunity, calling out microaggressions, being a little bit more innovative, rather than sitting there going, where are the women? They're there. We just need to nurture them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I guess the flip side of that then is what kind of gets in the way? Because we've talked about that, you know, it's not that we, particularly in this audience and people listening, it's not that we don't know what to do. What do you think hinders us? What gets in the way?
It's the middle layer. And we talk about it all the time in organisations, because the youngsters at the bottom, they get it. To your point, they're coming in and they're peachy keen and they're hungry, and they don't see these barriers and they don't see the exclusion or anything like that. You've got the people at the top that know this is good for business. They know this is what their organisations look like. It gets stuck in the middle, because what you have is sometimes it could be generational as well. This is the way it's always been done. If you want to get up to the top, you cut your cloth the hard way, just like I did, and all of that. I remember it from my days of banking. And also it's busy at that layer. So I'm not just pointing, the finger at middle layers. There's a lot of responsibility on that middle layer, to make the money. And so to give them an additional layer of things to think about and to do, that for me is where it gets stuck. So the work that needs to be done within that middle layer to show them the benefit of, and again, it's not just about equality, we're talking about equity, which is a much different thing.
Do you want to just explain the difference?
So you can imagine if everyone was at the same start line. Yeah. So equality is making sure that we all jump forward 10 steps. When you think about the world as it is and underrepresented groups, they're already 10 steps back. So equality is giving us all 10 steps. So if you think I'm here, I'm on the back foot because I'm a woman, I'm a black woman, perhaps I've got a disability, I'm way back here. Everyone else is here. So equality is giving us all 10 steps. And if you watch the journey, this woman here, she's never going to get up to there because she doesn't have the same opportunities. So equity is around fairness rather than equality is giving us both the same thing and expecting us to get there at the same time. Does that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
And there's a great video on YouTube that shows that. Youngsters kind of moving forward and moving back.
Absolutely.
So go and check that out.
Absolutely. I want to issue a little bit of a challenge, and just not just to you, Vanessa, but oftentimes I think we talk about the middle layer. But what about leaders? Because actually, don't they get their cues from leadership? So it's one thing to say, I'm in the middle of the business and I've got all of these things on top of me. But what do you think gets in the way of leaders actually enabling? And I'll put that to you. Yeah.
I think, you talked about, and I'll go back to the mining industry, the permafrost, leaders who've got promoted at a level of incompetent, which is managing individuals, and the difficulty of that intersectionality of individuality and creating the equality and the equity and inclusion is difficult. But I think people need toolkits because a lot of people, attempt to do things. But one of the things that we've been working on is shadow boards. And setting up a shadow board is giving people the access. So, you can get a good leader that says, right, I'm going to talk to, somebody about my board paper. Or you can say, actually, we've got 33 subsidiary boards around the world. We could have 33 little action points. Let's encourage, and it's giving people the information to the toolkit. Give them this paper, ask them this question, report back into the board meeting. And I think whether you're being consciously inclusive, so for example, if you're going to interrupt in the meeting, these are the 6 things that you can look for to stop the interruption, to support. And I think it's that's what we're working on in terms of future leaders, because I think what you can do is you can say, let's support this lot to give them the tools that they need. Let's support this lot and attempt to meet in the middle. And I see a lot of action here. Let's fix the minority, and less action here. And it's this lot that's actually needs quite a lot of money spent on it. So all these actions, and the diversity and inclusion leaders that are often asked to implement this, the problem with those is they're moving around. They're often not there. We see quite little continuity in terms of who we're talking for, which makes it even harder for the companies to be effective. But toolkits and real physical things, do this, do that, do the other, not just at the company level, because I think we've seen that at the top, but lower down. And of course, I'm always saying, and give people knowledge of the boardroom and inspire them to be in the boardroom at the community level to get a mini MBA on leadership. But I'm sure you're seeing very different things as well at Amazon.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can probably answer that a little bit more broadly in just, I guess, personal capacity of the different facets that I see. I think the first thing that I think is quite interesting is we often say these terms together, like diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity and inclusion, EDI, however you say it. They're really not the same. And even just like statistically, so McKinsey do some great reports every couple of years. I think the latest one was diversity wins. It's a couple of years old now, but it showed the sentiment on inclusion was 54% positive. even when the sentiment on diversity was 61% negative. So they're not mutually exclusive terms. They don't necessarily work together. And having strategies that are going to fix the whole thing as one inevitably doesn't work. So maybe sounds a little bit blunt, but I think if there was an easy way to solve the problem, we really wouldn't all be sat here today, because we've been having these conversations for decades. Particularly, it's not a silver bullet, but what there is things that clearly do work, and things that are a bit of a time suck. And to your point, toolkits are absolutely essential, because for leaders, if you don't give people the tools to do better, they're going to do what they've always done. We know the way that business in general ran wasn't the way that we want to run it now. We're talking constantly about innovation. Innovation is change. So we're saying we want to work in a different way, and most people are broadly aligned to that. But a lot of people have their experience, and they've done their professional career in different areas, and they've built to this level where they're suddenly spokespeople for all these different experiences they don't possess, all these problems that maybe they haven't personally encountered. And we're telling them to solve it without giving people the tools and the evidence of how to do it. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. So I would say that. And if I may, just two points I have on this. I think the conversation around targets is really interesting. And I really liked the way that Liv mentioned about it does show progress. It does. Targets are not quotas. And I think that needs to be really clear. And often, especially at mid-level, that's not communicated particularly well. So as someone who has in previous roles very clearly been used as a token, also doesn't make you feel like you really want to be there. And we talk a lot about attraction of talent, particularly from underserved and underrepresented groups. Probably the biggest loss of finance, time and talent is the retention element. And you don't see that in the data. If you survey every 2 years, it might not be the same people. If you're not retaining that talent, you've got a problem. So really leveraging those employee resource groups, we call them affinity groups at Amazon, as deeply as you can. And I think there's 2 ways to that, but I should pass back. But firstly, if you're going to ask people who are already experiencing some level of barriers or frustration, whether it's out of your organization and it's systemic or within, to give their time to do better, you need to give them the recognition for it. I see over and over again employee resource groups where women are working off the side to try and do better, but they're also the ones disenfranchised. And then actually, when it comes to promotions, you haven't got X, Y, and Z. So that's, I think, really, really important. And secondly, do your employee resource groups do what you want them to do? I find it really quite strange that collectively in every industry, we just gather a load of volunteers and often tell them to set a strategy or deliver on these really broad goals that aren't their job and aren't their experience. It's a difference between being someone who works in DEI as your job title, it might be HR faceted, it might be a set DEI leader, and being a volunteer. And there's absolutely room for both in this space, and it's necessary to have both in the space. But being really clear who should deliver what and how that works together is critical, or else you're just going to have the same cycle going round and round.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ria. And Marham, in your experience, what are the things that we should be avoiding?
Should be avoiding. It's an interesting one, actually. So I think the things that organizations, I'll actually flip that on its head to say actually what I think organizations should be doing, because I think we should focus, because a lot of organizations will be doing lots of different things, and we've all talked about some of the negative behaviors that we see that are spread, and there are some positive behaviors, but they are not perhaps consistent. For me, I think the things that organizations should be doing, and it starts with leadership, right? And I think, as you were saying, leaders need the tools. And one of the tools, really powerful tools for a lot of senior leaders, is data. And I think often organizations haven't really had the authentic experiences of women in their organizations. They don't really, because of the nature of their own journey and the fact that they have done well and been successful, part of the nature of that is they perhaps, not everyone, but many haven't necessarily experienced those barriers. And so in their perspective, in the way, Fiona, you talked about, you know, they've become successful, but they're like, oh, if, you know, competent people can get there if they really have the will and the skill, and actually they don't necessarily recognize those barriers. And so bringing the insights to bear for those individuals, helping them learn about the experiences that other individuals in their organizations are facing is really important. And that, I think, has to be done in 2 ways. One is obviously having the data in front of them to really understand where are the problems in your organization, because it will be different for every organization. You know, is it that we're not recruiting enough women? Is it that we are not promoting enough women? Is it that we're not retaining enough women? At what point in that journey Do we have problems, and why? And really getting the authentic feedback from women and really understanding what it is what are the barriers they're facing, because that's the only way you can really truly define what are the specific initiatives your specific organization needs. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you put in place initiatives that sound good or think will drive change, but actually are perhaps not targeting the specific needs of your organization. So for me, to answer the first question, what organizations don't do well is not do that. I think it's often they don't necessarily have a data-driven approach, which helps them identify the specific issues in their company, because energy, as we all know, has lots of different facets. There are renewables that is in a very different place. There are sort of energy tech organizations that are in a completely different place. Then we have our sort of traditional field force organizations that have also different needs. And so one cannot use the same approach with all of them, right? And I think for organizations, figuring out what that approach needs to be starts with the data.
Brilliant. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to open up to the floor for questions, and also for those online, if you could pop questions on Slido. So begin to get your questions ready if you haven't begun to think about them. So really, if I go to you, Rhea, first, you talked a little bit about it, but what are the kind of benefits and what are the recommendations you would give to the energy sector?
Gosh, I feel very underqualified for this, but here we go. I think the beauty of the job that I do in my sort of normal full-time job is I get to work across lots of different teams and a breadth. And you see in Amazon, great idea, which I think everyone can take, of what's core and common. So what is it that you need to deliver on, irrelevant of what someone's job title is? And this might be, if you look at your employee resource groups, what do all of them need to have? It might be broader than that. What does everybody need from a certain role? And then what's distinct and different? So what underserved and underrepresented groups need certain things that maybe other people don't, and equally which job roles or which particular problems need something different, and address them in that way. Don't try and have like a broad brush, but figure out the building blocks. I love the point on data. Something I'm really key on is your data relevant? Have you still got it? Did you do it 2 years ago? And are you still basing it on something that might not be accurate? So having relevant data and not just surveying on sentiment. So I think we're all pretty guilty of going to something and then doing a survey after and saying it was great, and then that's it, it was great. And we don't know whether that means it's got a long-term impact or what changes it inspires. So doing pulse point or temperature checks, I think is really, really critical. And then finally, it's a sort of more broadly of my work. I think leading with empathy is really key here, and empathy for everybody involved in the situation. I think possibly slightly optimistically, 9 times out of 10 people are really good people, and people are just doing their best. And as you heard from the presentations at the beginning, it's a really tough time for everybody at the moment, if we're being honest, irrelevant of your sector. It's really tough, and people are fighting their own battles. And part of that can be inspiring leadership to be more visible, and we've heard that already today, and to share those stories that maybe aren't as shiny. So you might need to be able to be vulnerable, which is something that not a lot of leaders are really inspired or kind of told to do, but that will help people in your workforce to recognize people going through similar situations to them. But on top of that, it helps to humanize leadership back down to your more junior members, to understand that actually everyone is doing their own things, and that's really critical. And then the final point I would say is meeting people where they are and giving them the tools to move forward, and recognizing that might not be the same. So with Mentor Campus, we talk about reverse mentoring a lot, and it's something I run for Amazon, which is amazing across all of our sectors. And I've been fortunate enough to be involved in nearly 15 different types of reverse mentoring programs, either writing them or participating across different industries, university level all the way up to senior level. Not a single one is the same. And you heard that matching people just to be together, it really doesn't work. You either need to be professionally met. Yeah, you either need to be connected professionally because someone's got a skill that someone wants to learn. That's great. That verges a little bit more on coaching towards sponsorship. It might be that you both have a favorite song and you like something in common, and that can be your spark point to start. And it might be even broader than that, that it is more coaching or sponsorship that you're looking for, but making sure that the things you have in place, like your resource groups and like your mentoring schemes and all the tick boxes that everyone's using to drive this change, are they actually delivering the change that you need? Or do you need to step back, audit them, strip them back and work backwards from what you want and figure out what needs to be true at each stage to get there? And then, sorry, if I said I was done, but the final one, just because I saw the slide before and it really, it made me smile a little bit. Yeah, where it's such a pipeline of talent, right? I think it was like some in the 20s that they had in one area, but we want to be at 40% in 3 years. So it's not in your pipeline. So where you're playing, meeting people where they are doesn't just mean, figure out where they're on their journey and bringing them along, but actually where's your pool of talent? So go back to Lily and I'll leave her there. Just started her A-levels, amazing, got top A star grades, is looking at all these industries, really hasn't been remotely approached by anything in this sector at all. She's been picked up by the tech, she's gone to some insight days for finance, she's been told she can be a lawyer. I think the industry that you're in isn't something that you'd see on TV shows. It's like the Grey's Anatomy phenomenon, right, where we all wanted to be doctors for a few years, and then Suits did it for law. Not really got that at the moment for the energy sector. So you need to meet young people where they are and find ways to inspire them and show them what a career in your industry looks like, because they don't know, and your pipeline doesn't have them.
Thank you very much. And Vanessa, what kind of recommendations would you make for
I'm
our
just
sector?
going to echo a lot of what they said. It starts with the data, right? Looking at your data and looking at fresh data as well, working out where your problems are. I'd say don't try to boil the ocean. It's really easy, especially when problems are surfacing everywhere. You're like, let's do that and let's do that. And I work with lots of big organizations and they must have 20 or 30 different individuals running around like chickens, trying to do different things, but nothing is kind of contributing to an overall strategy. So I think if you're in an organization where you're like, oh, we're doing this, we're doing that, my biggest piece of advice to you is stop. Just stop what you're doing, take a bit of a step back, look at your data, look at where your problems are, trust the data, but there's nothing like the lived experience. So making sure that you're factoring in time to go down to that grassroots level, not to pick on the middle. The middle probably want to help, but they've got their own frustrations, and that could be lack of knowledge in that area, fearful to do something. We have to factor that in as well. So I think talking to that middle layer as well, to work out what it is that you do, and whatever it is that you do, that it has significant impact. Perhaps not significant impact to the masses, but significant impact back to the equity point for those that are further on back down the line from that race.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. And Fiona, what recommendations would you make? What benefits would you?
You're making me laugh talking about headless chickens. Treat your employees like adults and give them the information they need to get on. We still do workshops today called On Track for Success, which is about how to be meeting management, championing achievements and understand influence. And do you know what your own company's board does? And people sit there going, no. And I remember talking to a very large energy company, there's two very big ones, many, many years ago, and saying, it might be interesting to talk to your employees about going on boards as part of a career development strategy. And I got told by the chairman, don't be ridiculous, the boardroom is not for them. And I said, why is the boardroom okay for you? And of course, he was assuming I was talking FTSE 100 and got confused. I'm talking about the local football club, the local arts, the local thing over there. And why is it okay for those individuals to have been on these community boards as part of career development, but not you? So that's my point about treat people like adults, treat the middle management like adults. They do care, they do want to do something. And on employee representative groups, they're an enormous conduit for information for you. Most big organisations have lost control of them. We're working with one at the moment outside Canary Wharf. They've got 12 ERGs in the UK. Multiply that with how many countries they've got. They've got more than 70 and they've lost control of most of them. So what they're looking at doing is making mini boards, reporting into MDs, so they're given a task, a budget, and and they have term limits. You can't just be a chair of one of those forever and control it all in your own way without a strategy. And that's what Vanessa talked about. Stop what you're doing. What strategically, what are we doing and why? And then you have success. And nobody's saying it's easy. And I think that's coming across loud and clear.
Thank you. And Marhan, last but not least.
I would probably say two things. I completely agree with what everyone has said on the panel today. I would add two things. One is that I think it needs to be done differently. Like, we cannot continue approaching this topic in the same way that we have. And one of the things that I've seen that organizations who have really moved the needle on this they have taken a transformation lens. And so this is a top 3 priority for the CEO, because it's not something that can be just delegated to HR or D&I leads. It is something that involves the whole organization. The whole organization needs to understand the role that they are going to play individually in taking this organization on this journey. And then the other point that I would say is, for me, the single point of failure or success for an organization today is in that frontline manager level. And I think for me, if organizations focus on that and thinking about, are you, like, for example, for me, I get weekly survey scores from my team on how their team experience has been every week. I get every 6 months upward feedback from all the individuals that I have worked with. And that is really something that is incredibly motivating for individuals in terms of driving a positive experience for their teams. And so what are the initiatives that we can put in place for those frontline teams, frontline managers, to make sure that they are motivated to create positive experiences for everyone working for them, whether they're a woman, whether they're a minority, or whether they're not. And I think putting that in place will improve the experience for everyone in the organization, not just for women and minorities.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, panel. That's very, very enlightening and very stimulating. So now it's your turn. I hope there are some questions. She said, fantastic. I see one straight up. Straight up. That's wonderful. So if I start with you, because you were first and I saw it. So just in the middle row there, if you could put your hand up, please. If you have any questions, just in the middle there. So wait for the mic. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very enlightening. My name is Aditi. My question is, what's your experience and suggestions for when certain minority groups almost turn against each other? If you have women who believe that young people shouldn't be at a certain level by a certain age, and therefore they shouldn't get, salaries like this. Or if you believe, if some South Asians might say, no, I don't want X race on my team, because there are inherently racial cultures sometimes in other cultures and countries. So what are your suggestions for, I guess, when groups turn against each other?
I can only take it from the Queen Bee. Does anyone recognise that term?
Yes.
I won't pick up the racing. I think that's one for you. But I think, there will always be challenges with certain individuals in terms of their leadership styles. And I think, as a collective, if that behaviour is observed, and it's easy for me to say, call it out, but sometimes that is a detriment to your own kind of career. But I would absolutely suggest that perhaps if a few of you are observing that behaviour, that you get together as a group and then work out, like, what is the best way of articulating the way that person's behaviour is making the collective group feel. It has to be with a certain amount of tact and diplomacy, because an individual like that is likely to kind of go up and roar, and if anything, make matters worse. But I think that's a damaging behaviour, to have. So I think, as I say, perhaps there's power in the collective, if you know what I mean, by just understanding how do we articulate how this makes us feel and why that perhaps that perception is wrong. So I would pick it up from that perspective. But thank you, Vanessa.
I can give just sort of, in the time that I've been in the DEI industry with mentoring, that's something that's come out quite a lot, because I think a lot of the time we think it will just get fixed by people sharing stories, and I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. So the first is to have paths for empathy. Like I said it already, it's a really tough time for a lot of people out there for a lot of reasons. If you don't have ways that people can share their truths and feel validated in their experiences, people aren't necessarily always willing to hear about someone else who they also think might be struggling. So have somewhere people can share their own stories, and you'll find that they'll be more willing to hear other people's and understand that. And secondly, I mentioned it with targets aren't quotas. The reason lots of underrepresented and underserved communities typically feel a sense of fear when it comes to another group, because they've always sort of been told there's room for 1 or 2 groups at the table, and bringing other people on board might mean you're giving up your own seat. And that's the problem with the idea of a quota. So dispelling that, making it really clear that that's not true, and incentivizing people to be vested in each other's successes is really, really key. And I'll give a really quick example. In one of the reverse mentoring programs we do, we look at the idea of privilege, because absolutely everyone in this room has it in some place and doesn't have it in another. And that's okay. And recognizing how you make certain choices in your life. So we ask leaders, is how we do it, to come with between 3 and 5 decisions they've made in their life, what they sort of thought about at the time, so what their responsibilities were and what the outcome was for them. And by working through that with another person, you understand where people can't even make those choices because their responsibilities are different, or where even if someone does the exact same action you did, their outcome would be different. So that's how we use storytelling to be a little bit more powerful than just saying it's the right thing to do. Recognize where it's coming from, address it with either education or access paths to share your own stories, and create communities that are vested in each other's success rather than pitted for a tiny piece of the table.
Thank you. Fiona?
I just wanted to pick up on that and tell you a funny story. I was talking to a managing partner of a very large law firm. He said, Fiona, you don't understand. Our female partners are not supporting the women in this organisation. They were acting like queen bees. And he said, it's just not right. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have a go at Jenny until you, because you're asking for 5 equity female partners to support 95 graduates, female graduates. There are 95 male equity partners and they're supporting 95. Do you think that ratio is fair? So I'm not going to have a go at Jenny for not getting it until you're going to have a go at David, Fred, Bob and everyone else that's up there, because the underlying the issue is leadership and how collaboratively inclusive we are. And I'm hugely encouraged by a conversation I had last week with one of the top 4 accountancy firms who came to us and said, will we do some collaborative leadership stuff? Because they're worried about the word woke. Because some of their middle managers are saying, well, these younger generations, they don't get it. They're too sensitive. It's not like it was for us. So they've asked us to do a workshop purely to say, actually, no, you don't get it. Because those woke individuals are individuals and they're walking out of this organisation right now, which is affecting the long-term survivability of our company, and that is not acceptable. So I think it's challenging the whole thing. I agree that it is a problem, but I think it's in the round.
Thank you. Did you want to?
I mean, only to build on what you said, that I think there's 2 things. Feedback, super, super critical that organizations are collecting it, but there has to be consequences. And I think just collecting feedback is not good enough. And I think people can sort of get away with poor behavior. And it doesn't have to be just ethnic minority. It could be anyone, right? And making sure that that is reflected in consequences, whether that's comp, that's ratings, whatever it is. But for some individuals, I find they will do the right thing anyway because it's in their nature. For some, they won't, and they are prone to display some behaviors, and organizations need to put policies in place that prevent those in the best way possible. You can't stamp it always out, but I think having the right consequences in place can change some of those behaviors.
Thank you. And thanks for your question, Aditi. So I'm going to go to the Slido question now, and the most popular question you've almost touched. I'm not sure if you've seen Slido, Fiona, but one of the most popular question, the most popular questions is, have you found that women also don't help other women up the chain when they are successful? And do we need to coach women as well? I'm tempted to start with you, but I'll pause.
Just separate in the middle.
I got there first.
Yeah, you could feel it, couldn't you, Vanessa? I was coming to you.
We're doing it. Well, actually, we got our big tech summit on the 6th of December, and we've done a whole piece, because I told you what came out of our research was about male allyship and sponsorship. And actually, a segment of that conference, we are talking about it's not just men that need to be allies. So when we did the research, I had a number of focus groups with loads of different women across tech. And it pains me to say it, because I'd love to live in a world where we all support each other. And, you know, we don't kind of, we shouldn't be having the conversation about not kind of the sisterhood not supporting themselves. But unfortunately, it's a fact of life. I've been on the end of it in organisations, but I think the biggest challenge is, again, to changing that conversation and challenging that behaviour. It does go to Ria's point, one and done, whether that's women, whether that's race or whatever. But it's like, I've kind of, you know, worked my way up the organisation. It's been really, really tough for me. And, you know, I'm kind of queen of this bit. And it just makes me cringe even saying it. But how does that progress the organisation? How is that playing to the role model that woman should be when other women are looking up going, you know, I want to be like her. I want the same responsibilities. I think what we need to do is to think about the leaders we will become, because some of that stuff we can't fix. It's out of our remit. But I think for everybody who's sitting in this room, as you go up the chain, which you will, with organisations like this and all the other support, it's a good time to be a woman, believe it or not, from a career perspective. Challenge me on that. But thinking about the leaders that you want to be, you know, the fact that you can open up a door of opportunity for someone else. You can all be sponsors of each other. When I talk about sponsorship, people often think, oh, I need to be seen here for that. Absolute rubbish. If you've got two colleagues that do the same job and you're in a meeting and someone's saying, oh, we might have this opportunity for so-and-so, and you say, oh, do you know who'd be really good for that? She did a fantastic piece of work. That is lifting as you climb. Right. And we can all do that. No rank or anything involved. So I think, you know, there is an element of women that don't help women. And there is a perception that is true, especially from my tech audience and in other industries. I've heard it. But I think, you know, let's not focus spending loads of time on a very small minority. Let's focus our time on being the leaders that we should all be and supporting not just women, but obviously everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I'm gonna
go to the next question because I'm conscious that we're drawing to a close. The next question, which was again popular on Slido, was intersectionality is very important in businesses. How do we make sure that women of colour, disabled women, trans women feel a sense of belonging in women's networks? And Maham, would you like to answer first?
Yeah, sure. So I completely agree. Intersectionality is really important, which is why I think really understanding the authentic experiences of those different intersections is really important, because what an Asian woman like me experiences in an organization will be perhaps different to what a Black woman or an LGBTQ individual will face. And I think using that information to build what your organization needs to look like and the changes your organization needs to make is really important. So I would say incredibly important, but the one size doesn't fit all. And so I think it's really about trying, and it's hard work. It's not an easy thing actually to understand. And it's really about reaching out and having that vulnerability to ensure that those women feel safe in sharing their experiences. So I would really say, you know, listen is probably the most important thing.
Thank you. Ria.
I think just finding, we mentioned it before, pathways to collaboration, but so we mentioned employee resource groups, helping people come together and run cross-pollination events and having areas where people can exist intersectionality within the workplace. If we want to champion it, we need to have ways that it can be visible to start with. And then also to recognize it, sorry to on the point, but it splits it down even more. So I'm an Indian woman, I have my mum and two sisters, so four of us essentially have kind of grown in the same household. We're very different people, and that's because our experiences are very different. So focusing more on that diversity of experience and giving people the places to share them and be proud of them and feel valid in them will naturally drive that intersectionality. And again, to point on women, sort of not supporting women on this area sometimes, recognize that just because you have a shared characteristic with someone doesn't mean that you're the same. It's not a monolith. There's a lot of room in that. So we need to make sure that we're inspiring and helping people and believing their truth.
Thank you. You spoke eloquently earlier about intersectionality, so I'm not going to go to you for this. I'm going to bring in the final question from Slido. And are there any other questions in the floor? Oh, look at that. Should have checked with you before. I think I'll fit one more in. So let's see who smiles at me most brightly, she said. The next question that I wanted to ask was really, what would you say to people that think positive discrimination and targets pushes other competent people out, I think it means. And should our decisions be based on meritocracy?
I can't wait to pick that one up. Ria is not a target, she's a beacon of light. And it is a tough thing. And it was a black partner from Leeds PwC who told me that, because she was always getting told she's only got promoted because, and she's a beacon of light. The second thing is my two sons, you know, one's 26 and one's 24. I do not want to hear them come out of their mouth that it's not fair, I can't get promoted because it's all about, you know, women, it's all about intersectionality. And I keep reminding them, and they're not saying that, they wouldn't dare in front of me. I keep reminding them, at what type of firm do you want to work for? What type of leader you want to be? And one of them talked to me about an incident that happened in the office where somebody got shouted down and he could see they're uncomfortable, and he came home and told me about it. And I said, it's not good enough to tell me about it. What did you do after that happened? Did you go and talk to your boss and said, I felt uncomfortable for that woman? Or did you go over to her and say, what can I do to support you in the future? And that's what we want to be as those future leaders, because it is making sure that people aren't tokens. And I think in terms of targets, it's great to see companies embracing them, but those targets have to be intelligent. Because if the IT department is starting at 5%, don't give them a target of 40. And expect them, the department that's the 35 to get to 40. And you need to look at the turnover in each department. Otherwise, you will get entrenched behaviours saying that's not fair. And it is how you support that minority with that view. But you are a beacon of light.
Thank you. Excellent. So I saw the person with the cerise jacket. Yes, it's you. It's So if you could, wait for the mic and then ask the question.
Shoulder pad strike again. How addressing. I am very inspired by all of you and all your stories. I am a woman and I am exhausted. Every meeting, I'm thinking, what microaggressions am I dealing with here? How do I call out this behaviour? I'm trying to be better than the men in the room because I need to progress in my career, and I need to lift the people up around me, and I'm doing all of that all the time, and it's just constant. And that's not a bad thing. That's what I should be doing, and that's what I should be looking for in my leaders and emulating myself. My question is, how have you built your resilience to endure this, and do you have any top tips for how I can?
First of all, someone give this lady a new job.
That's not behaviour you should have to do.
Yes. Resilience.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
It's tough. I hear you. Right. I've been in organisation. I work for 9 different banks where the same thing every single day. And you're contemplating, actually, is my future here? And sometimes it's hard because you've built up your reputation there, you're good at your job, your network's there, and it seems too difficult to kind of walk away from some of that. But I think if you're focusing so much of your time working out how you power up that resilience, no joking aside, I'm sorry, but you're in the wrong organisation. Unless there are things going on as well. The other thing is, are other women feeling the same? Because there is obviously a cultural mismatch in terms of what should be happening within that org. So it's really hard. I mean, having a good support network around you, you know, when you have tough times, to call on to say, like, I have what I call my personal boardroom, 3 senior women on a WhatsApp group that I can kind of rant off to. But again, to my point, there's only so much of that you can do. So harnessing your inner resilience, putting on that big cloak of armour every day, it will wear you down towards the end. I wish I could give you a silver bullet answer, but I think support network around you, looking at, you know, how far ahead would your career be accelerating if you weren't spending your time trying to toughen up every single day. So I think maybe let's put some effort into what that new journey looks like in 2023. I'm looking at all of you now.
Thank you, Vanessa.
The one thing I would say to you is that think of yourself as a role model for the individuals for the women who are below you, and what would you want them to think about you, and how would you want them to tackle those particular challenges? Because I think often we have the perception that we want to say yes to everything because we are well intentioned, and as you said, Fiona, there are 5 women who have the burden of bringing through 95 women, and it's about I have a daughter, so getting home in time and doing bedtime and bath time, but also being really good at work. and making sure that actually at the same time, I am sponsoring and mentoring other women and attending all the networking events, and also at the same time doing lots of interviewing. And because, you know, we do lots of training, going to those trainings because you want female role models visible, that takes up just a lot of time. And what I would say, and time is incredibly precious, especially when you're in that situation, and there are lots of pulls on it. And so what I would say is, if you were to be the role model that you want people to aspire to, what are the changes you would make in your day-to-day? Because actually sometimes saying no is much more powerful and inspiring, because what you're saying is, I really value my time, and these are the things I really want to focus my time and energy on, versus I'm going to do everything, but actually everything is not going to be done as to the best of my ability. So I would say actually think about where you're spending your time, where you really want to.
Thank you. Fiona, and then Ria.
Occasionally I get asked on a panel, what would I have done differently in my career? What's the regret that I have in my life? And my biggest regret is actually not showing vulnerability when I was head of global equities, because I looked like Princess Perfect, and that's not how I was feeling. And one of the things that, just to cut all the organisations a bit of slack, society plays a role in here. Because I was lucky enough to marry a man whose mother was the main breadwinner. I didn't do that consciously, but it was enormously significant, because when I had a kid, I just looked at the kid and thought, well, it's not my problem. And my husband thought, well, it's not my problem. And we basically brought the kids up together and properly shared. And of course, that was my own family experience with my father and how he supported my mother working. So I didn't get half of these issues, and therefore I didn't do the support that I should have supported, because I didn't realize it was a problem. I just thought, well, I'd get over it, you know. I've not gone to the PE day. So I think you know, there's a lot. I really felt for you, and I'm glad you've asked that question, because it is tough being perfect, but society's still bringing, you know, young girls up to be perfect, and boys aren't sharing in the same way. So there's lots of things we can do at home in how we're bringing up our children and how we are having conversation. And then one other joke about my children, one of my kids, his daughter, you know, didn't really know what her father did, the friend. Why doesn't she know what her father did? You know, it was just gobsmacking to me. But it's just those things that we can all share and make sure we're not consciously biased at home unintentionally.
Thank you. And Ria.
Well, Vanessa wanted you to give you a job. I wanted to give you a hug, because I think like I have in you, if that makes you in any some way better. And to Fiona's point there, we've all felt at times, probably because of society, it really is similar. It really is exhausting. So I'll do two super quick bits of advice, because I imagine if you're going through all of that, then also trying to find another job is just like on that, and I appreciate it. But every career move that I've made, I say it like I've had many, but the ones that I've had have all been because of my network around me. And it speaks to the earlier point on how we're going to build that pipeline, right? With Mentor Compass, we have a massive peer mentoring circle where women can support women, and you're not in direct competition because you're not in a company, so tries to get rid of that level of it. Vanessa has the most incredible, so at the beginning with the awards, network of We Are the City, which spans so many different industries. I won't labour the point too heavily, because I'm aware we're trying to keep female talent in this industry, but there's so many of the skills that you have are so transferable, and I didn't realise that till I moved industry, really how similar my job would be in two different places. So just knowing that there are huge networks out externally, if you're not getting it internally, that are going to pick you up and support you. Might just be event, might be some practical advice, go for it. And then the second, I guess, is my practical advice, which is to almost strip or put your sort of a feeling on it on the side and look at the pure like a business problem. You're clearly not getting very good communication and sort of milestones. So I would sit down with your manager, be really clear and be like, right, I'm looking at promotion in this quarter of this year. What needs to be true between now and then for that to happen? Let's break it down by quarter, or however often you go, like half a year. Have those checkpoints. If you're not meeting them, be like, what do I need to get there? Because you said you'd support me. And call it out in meetings. I love a passive aggressive call out. So just be like, sorry, did you not hear me speaking? Or just even at the end on a one-on-one, just be like, hi, I tried to raise a few points on it. I felt you weren't really listening to me. Is there a way that you'd rather I communicate? And often there isn't. So I know. But you may as well say it. So if you feel comfortable, I would just call it out yourself and have a clear plan for yourself. But you're going to be fine. There's people here. We'll sort it.
Can I just add one final point? For the senior leaders in this room, this lady's not alone. there's lots of women that feel like that in the organisation. What you heard today, and thank you so much for showing up and bringing that, is a lived experience, and it's a lived experience of a lot of women. So for those senior leaders, if you're thinking the next time you're in a meeting, you're looking around that room, perhaps think about, is that person exhausted? Are their ideas not getting heard? Are they going to walk out of the organisation at some particular point because they don't have the support they need? So
thank you all very much. And please could I thank the panelists. So it behoves me now to hand over to my erstwhile colleague and colleague on the powerful board, Matthew. And thank you again for all of your contributions. I think there was a request for the film that Liv, we got to come off. I think there was a request for the film that Liv showed to be shown again. So I think that we'll be able to do that. So I'm just passing that on to my colleagues. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, can you hear me at the back okay? Microphone working? Actually, I was just mic'd up the moment before I went off to the bathroom. I don't know whether you ever remember the Naked Gun film with Leslie Nielsen. If you remember that scene, that was just my sort of potential nightmare, but thankfully it didn't happen. Anyway, this is billed as a fireside chat. So I guess you'll have to use your imagination on this one. Obviously, it's too early to put the heating on anyway, as we know. But you'll have to imagine myself and Monica sort of, I don't know, what we're doing, sipping hot chocolate, lightly toasting marshmallows, maybe.
Fluffy sippers.
Fluffy sippers. We should introduce ourselves, I think. My name is Matthew Wright, and I'm on the board of Powerful Women, have been on the board for, I don't know, about 5 years or so. And my day job is working for the electricity system operator at National Grid, keeping the lights on and transitioning to net zero. I'm joined today by Monica. You can introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Monica Collings, and I'm the Chief Executive of So Energy, a retail energy supplier here in the UK. Apologies for that. I've been in energy for about 5 years, and prior to that worked in automotive, property and retail. So lots of adjacent type industries that are really quite relevant in the energy transition. So it's lovely to be amongst you all today.
Very good. So the title of this session is how do we deliver change, and why does it matter? There's going to be Monica and I chatting away for about 15-20 minutes. You can join in if you like, but we're mostly just going to be chatting away. And then we're going to have a panel. I have no idea, and we're going to be joined by Sinead and Tom Glover, who is hopefully here somewhere. Oh, he's right there. He's right in the front. I thought I heard you at the back, so I was looking at the back. Frankly, I have no idea how we're going to follow your panel, Lorraine. That was one of the best panels I have seen at a conference in my life. So that was absolutely brilliant. So I'm feeling quite sort of.
It's incredible.
I'm feeling quite nervous about matching that. I've got no chance, but anyway, we will do our best, and we'll use Slido, and we'll hopefully get quite a lot of questions from the audience as well, as they were so good as well. So anyway, I suppose we should start with the sort of why does it matter. We've heard quite a lot about that already. Fantastic, Powerful Women video, loved it. But I guess, you know, Monica, from your perspective, you know, why are we here? Why does this matter, this issue?
If we go right back to what Sarah was talking about this morning in the energy trilemma, there's a really big challenge that needs addressing. And in order to do that, we need the best talent possible. We need innovation, we need creativity, and we need people to join the mission, particularly if we are going to achieve net zero. And so for me, that's kind of number one of the most important things that we need to think about. As a business that looks after customers, we need to make sure that we have representation within our business. Otherwise, how can we ensure that we are relevant to customers? And so that's important. And I think Actually, we need diverse thinking if we're going to tackle the challenges that we're facing as an industry. And I loved the slide where it showed that healthcare and education are seeing better gender representation. And I have often been in conversations with people who have said, well, women tend to gravitate towards caring professions, as if that's some kind of excuse. But in an energy crisis, is it not the exact thing that we need? That we need a caring approach, and therefore attracting more women into our industry might just provide skills, approaches, alternatives that are really relevant to helping us solve some of the challenges that we're facing today.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, for me, I think, I first realized the power of diverse teams, or the lack of power in undiverse, if that's the word, about 20 years ago. I was working in the US at the time, and I was responsible for a team in Salt Lake City, Utah. Nothing against Salt Lake City, Utah, fabulous place, love it. I had a great time there. But the team I was responsible for there were they were all men. They were all white men. They were all white men between the age of about 35 and 50. They were all white men between the age of 35 and 50 that had been born and bred in Salt Lake City. They were all white men between the age of 45, 35 and 50. I've changed their ages. Born in Salt Lake City, went to Brigham Young University, etc. And so it goes on. And there's a particular problem we were having, and I said, team, how are we gonna solve this problem? And I asked the first chap, and he said, I think we should do this. I asked the second person, what do you think we should do? Well, I agree with him. Third, same. But fourth, same. Everybody had exactly the same perspective. It was unbelievable, quite unbelievable, surreal. And I became sort of passionate from then on about sort of the power of diverse teams, and it's borne out again and again and again by all the stats, and McKinsey and all these companies sort of study these things. But it's absolutely the case. And as you say, Monica, and Sarah Munby summarised this beautifully this morning in terms of the challenges that the sector faces. When I started work, it was sort of, you felt that the chief executive or the senior team had all of the answers, and when you get there and you realise you don't, you're sort of in trouble. But nobody has all the answers in this sector. Nobody. So where are we going to get the ideas and the innovation if we've all got this groupthink and this sort of with talent doesn't discriminate? And so, we need diverse teams to actually solve the crisis. So, I think the point has been made, but none of us would be in this room if we didn't sort of believe that. But I think we can sort of move on fairly quickly from the why it matters piece to the what do we need to do to change? And I think those stats that Katie went through again today, they're sort of, it's not even, well, I hope it's not glacial pace, because actually most of the glaciers in recession. So they're actually not moving forward at all anymore. They're going backwards. So hopefully that analogy doesn't work. But we need to speed it up. What were the stats? 15% of executive director positions, 29% in the leadership pipeline. It's super embarrassing. A quarter of boards in the energy sector is still all male. So if anybody was in any doubt that we still needed to make progress, hopefully that would, sort of convince you otherwise. But Monica, you are a CEO in the sector, but as we were sort of preparing for this session, you had some anecdotes about just behaviours that you still sort of experience. Do you want to share some of that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think it points to some of the conversations that we had previously around vulnerability and sharing some of those experiences. And certainly within the ELC, we talk about some of the dark underbelly of what's actually happening within the industry. And if you think it doesn't happen to me as somebody who has progressed to this point in my career, then you would be mistaken. But I think to take it right back to points in my career, quite often when you talk about your career and you talk about moments, you talk about jobs that you've had or experiences that you've had. And I think if I can articulate two things that I think women face as challenges that perhaps men don't really necessarily appreciate in kind of the context of what we see. So women are often in situations where they are marginalized, where they are the only women on a virtual call or the only woman in a boardroom. And I have found myself quite often in those situations. And you may be the most resilient character or the most confident person, but when you are the only one and nobody looks like you, you feel different because you are different in that conversation. And there are different perspectives shared. And unless you feel strong enough that actually that is valued and valuable, it can cause you to have certain feelings and thoughts that you might not otherwise. The other thing that I think women really the challenge that women have is around what I call career interruptions. So their careers are often interrupted by a number of things. So whether that be having children, or in my case, I got divorced and I was a single mum. Then when I remarried, my husband was in the military. So I spent long periods of time where I was back to being a single mum, but actually with 2 children this time. And early on in my career, I spent a lot of time working in male-dominated industries. So automotive in its heyday was very male-dominated. And I started to adopt characteristics that might be typically male. And I think this is where actually we need to think about, if we're leveling the playing field here, then we accept that women have different characteristics and we make the resources available and accessible to them to succeed in environments where that is welcomed. And I, at the time, didn't appreciate that at all, because I didn't see any female role models and I didn't see that it was okay to be myself. And I think that's something that has evolved in terms of bringing your whole self to work. Actually, that's something that we talk an awful lot about. And, you know, talking about our roles as leaders, it's super important that we make sure that we create those safe spaces in those environments. I'm often approached to sit on boards just because I'm a woman. And I'll always say no, because unless you actually want me to do a particular job, that my skills are able to unlock something or add value, it's not just because the shareholder needs a token woman on the board to make the numbers look good. And I think perhaps the most striking example I can share with you is one from earlier in the year, and I have written about this on LinkedIn, but I went to an event, it was around Easter time, and there was a circle of people just in conversation, and I was the only woman. There were 8 men, and we were just having a chat, and some of the people I knew really well, one of them was direct report, and somebody on the other side of the circle suggested that we do introductions and we go around and we introduce who we are. So I'm waiting patiently for my turn and go around the circle. Person on my left, who is my direct report, introduced himself. Person who's instigated this round of introductions completely avoids me and goes to the man to my right and asks him to introduce himself. Now, the colleague on my right actually works within the same group and said, actually, I think you've missed Monica. And he corrected the situation. And I was gobsmacked. And at that point, and I'm not shy, I'm a very confident person, but I was like, did that actually just happen? Or did I just dream it? And so I sort of mumbled through my introduction, and then I was kicking myself because I was like, actually, I didn't introduce myself very well. And then we carried around the circle, and then we were having lunch, and then I said to my colleague to my left, did you see what happened? And he was like, no.
Oh my God. So
he'd completely missed that this interaction had happened, and I was like, maybe it didn't happen then. So maybe and this will really make you laugh. Then I thought, well, actually, maybe he just didn't see me because I'm so short, which is a ridiculous thing to actually think that would happen. But that is what went through my mind. So anyway, so we went through this whole thing, and I went home that evening and I was sat with my children, and they were like, hi Mum, how was your day? It was a really lovely event. And I was like, yeah, although something really odd happened. I think it happened, and let me tell you. And my son said to me, Mum, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That must have felt really awful. And then my daughter said to me, I don't know why you didn't stab him in the eye with your foot.
I think that deserves it.
And I mean, fair play to her. And then my husband said, well, what did you say to him? And what did you do about it? Like, do you know what? I didn't do anything. And I should have done. And at the end of the lunch, I was getting up to leave and I was going. And this chap, he walked over to me and he said, oh, I don't think we got introduced properly. And then he introduced himself and I twigged actually who he was. And he was somebody trying to sell me something, to actually do business with me. And I still didn't say anything, which I ought to have done, but I didn't. And at that point, I thought, God, this is not somebody that I would want to do business with, because if that's how you treat me in this circle of people that I feel safe in, people that I know, and some people that I've just met, but actually really lovely, that's not how I want people in my organisation to feel. Mm. And so it happens and it's real. And it's just, I was so shocked by it. So shocked.
Beggars belief, doesn't it? But stories are more powerful than stats, aren't they? I mean, that will stick with you. Imagine that, the embarrassment of it. Interestingly, this is a very unusual situation for me today as a white man in a room with a majority of women. It does feel different. And that's what many of you face all the time. And it's not until you sort of put yourselves into these situations that you can even, possibly imagine. Now, this is a very nice place and very welcoming, by the way, and I haven't, it's all upside, particularly it's easy to get into the male toilets. But it's a very unusual situation. And I enjoy this just from the learning experience and trying to put myself, I'm a white, middle-aged, straight guy. I haven't always been middle-aged, but I don't think I've ever been discriminated against in my entire life. I can't think of any of the sort of things that you probably experience on a daily basis. How on earth am I going to sort of know and understand about what some of these things are as a leader unless I sort of put myself in these situations and or talk to people? And I think that sort of takes us onto this sort of things that we can do or have done to sort of change situations. And just directly on that point for me, in my last role actually, when I was working at Ørsted UKMD, actually chaired the very first Energy Leaders Coalition. It was a privilege to sort of found that at the time for powerful women. And while I was at Ørsted, there were some very active, what we're calling sort of employee resource groups today. There was a Women in Ørsted group, there was LGBTQ group, various minorities groups. And they were all doing good stuff and they're all working away there, sort of volunteering hard and raising the profile. But they weren't connected in any way to the leadership. They were sort of, happening in a lunchtime or maybe after work. They didn't have any sort of formal standing, didn't have any budget, to do anything, etc. And so one thing I did is I formalized all that. I formed a kind of steer code for the key groups. I chaired them as the UKMD and the leader in the country, and asked people, because how would I know? What were the things that were sort of getting in the way of their career progression? What were the issues that they were facing at work? What were the microaggressions and things that they were facing? Because how on earth could I know that unless I actually asked them? But what I had was probably more power to fix some of them. So that was really good. And the Women in Ørsted group, for example, sort of brought their top 3 things. And on that list was actually fixing paternity pay to sort of level it up. So it wasn't just a no-brainer decision about who takes more time off. We fixed that, tick. The mentoring program got a big push. I was pleased to see actually in the case studies in the ELC report, that's moved on now to sponsorship as well within the company, which we've heard so much about. But those things came directly out of linking the employee resource groups to the leadership that could actually get stuff done. did the same with the LGBTQ group, sort of say, what, again, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What are the issues? So that's one of the things that I did, and I think is very, very successful. You know, formalize those groups, go and chair them, or at least participate, maybe have somebody else chair, give them a budget, give them a voice, and sort of track and monitor, you know, delivery, just like you would with any other sort of key initiative in your organization. You got some examples of stuff you have done, Monica?
Yeah, a lot of them we've already heard about today around introducing things like reverse mentoring programs. So all of it, and it's actually, I think we talked a little bit about this before, but around structure and how you create structure around this. So it's mandatory for all of my senior leaders to have reverse mentors to make sure that we get that feedback. And I think there's sort of quantitative data that we need, but there's also this qualitative aspect. So how do we get that two-way feedback, those conversations? I have something called on the couch sessions, which sound lovely, but they're kind of slightly...
It would be nice now to, frankly.
That's our fireplace, that way. But the on the couch session is designed for anyone to come and talk about anything. There's no real set agenda, but I need to feel connected to my organisation as the person who is the figurehead and the person responsible for much of the decision making, to enable me to do that from an informed point of view, to understand what the issues are that people within the organisation are facing. And so I think those things become incredibly important. And many years ago, I started my career out in advertising. And we used to have these sort of principles around when you make a TV commercial, and you'll never look at commercials in the same way again, but these are the secrets, these top 3 secrets, right? So you have things that you show, which are things that you visually show on the commercial that are important, things that you show pictures of. Then you have things that you hear, so you listen to, so things that you say, which are slightly less important. And then there's words that you put on the screen, so things that you say that are the most important things, because you take that in. So you remember the story and then you see the things in words. So if it's important enough to have all 3 of those things, you see it, you hear it, you say it, you show it, then you know it's really significant. And I think as leaders, if we do all of those things through the role modeling, through the policies we introduce, through the ways in which we behave, through the environments in which we create, and how we behave ourselves within those environments. So as a woman of a certain age, when I go into a meeting room and the temperature's not quite right because I'm having a hot flush, we'll talk about that and we'll take a pause, or open a window for a while and then come back to what we were doing. Or if you recognise that, coming back to the race point actually, that somebody within your organisation has particular religious beliefs, and I have this within my management team at the moment, I do not book meetings during prayer time. I don't do it. And guess what? If I don't do it, no one else does it. And so by role modeling those behaviours and what you want people to adopt and to see, and to create those spaces where everyone can bring their genuine selves to work, then you have more chance of success in implementing the things like the menopause policies and the other things that help to provide the structure around it. So I think it is important for those kind of 2 dynamics to live together. Yeah. Is that something that you can relate to?
Totally. I was actually quite impressed with some of the examples of, which we'll probably come on to a little later in the panel, in some of the things that people are now being sort of taught about in terms of leadership skills. We'll come back to that in a second. There was one other thing, slightly controversially, I think, in the light of some of the comments that I've heard today, maybe from Ria, and it's not really a quota, but go with me on this. So again, when a previous role, one of the things I was frankly sick and tired of hearing as an excuse is, oh, there are no women in the pipeline to promote. I mean, how many times have you heard that? I mean, people just not really looking. But the problem, one of the problems lay with the talent programs, which, you know, everybody likes a meritocracy and everything's nicely prorated. But I don't know who it was that said, if you do what you've always done, you get what you've always got. And so if the ratio of the total employment was 80-20 male female, and then you were trying to sort of find more women in the pipeline, and the representation on the talent programs was maybe 80-20, actually it was worse than that. It was more like 90-10. I, somewhat controversially, made it 50-50. Now, as a target, maybe it's a quota, I don't know. But it worked. It worked. And I kind of, it's a sort of strong thing in my career, is just as an aside, you know, in commercial markets or in markets in energy, I think markets favor incumbency. If you want to do something different, you have to have a stimulus, a trigger. You know, in the case of offshore wind that I was working in, we had contract for differences and we had a separate market, and the original sort of, you know, prices were really high, and then they came down dramatically, and it's a massive success story. But there had to be a catalyst and a trigger. So I changed it, and people complained, well, it's not fair, you know, it's not fair to the guys. But you know, we changed it and it worked, and you know, that was something that's something that I'm sort of proud of, because I think it helped sort of bring many more women through an executive pipeline. But coming to your point, you know, about the other thing, I kind of think that this whole issue that we're talking about today, in broader sense, diversity, equity, inclusion, however we describe it and label it, I actually think it's an essential leadership skill, just the awareness and knowledge of it. I was quite impressed with some of the case studies, again, in the Energy Leaders Coalition report. The EDF case study is called Be the Change Makers, which is about building future leaders, emotional intelligence and empathy. And sort of we've heard some examples already, you know, exposing people to some of these situations that they wouldn't, you know, the 24-year-old and the menopause couldn't spell it, let alone understand what it is. But you know, that's important that they do understand that that's around them. There's a great initiative with DRAX, with an inclusive leadership program for leaders and managers. There's actually Liv Garfield talked about the menopause training at Severn Trent. So there's a lot of these things going on, which again, there's no excuse really not to get sort of educated and aware of these issues. Is that something that you've seen in your business as well?
Yeah, and I think like the case study that we submitted was around the recruitment process, and I think in some ways actually tackling it at the recruitment stage probably the easiest area to do it, right? Because you can attract people in, you can get them in, you can have diverse recruitment panels, and you can make sure that you are treating people fairly and trying to tackle unconscious bias through the process. But making sure, and I think consistency is the word that I would pull through, because making sure that all of your leaders behave in a consistent way, and that those policies are adopted and that guidelines followed in the same way, so that everyone has access to resources, everyone has the same and equal opportunities, is challenging. And it only takes one person to slip up for somebody's experience to not be brilliant. But I think, as we've already seen today, you know, tackling that, not letting standards slip, living through your values, reinforcing expectations, baselining standards through training and education to make sure that those things are valued and understood. And therefore, what it allows people to do is select your organisations, back to your point, my lovely, around, you know, actually, is this the type of environment that I want to work in or not? And if it isn't right for me, I can select not to be part of it, because I'm really clear at the point of entry, right the way through my whole experience, what this should look and feel like. And if it doesn't feel like something that I've signed up to, I can see it's being called out or recognised and addressed. So actually, it's about the cultures that we create and how we consistently deliver upon those.
Very good. I sense the embers on the fire are starting to sort of, you know.
Need to give it a poke.
Yeah. And the marshmallows are completely toasted. So we're going to move into the next phase of this session, which is to invite the other sort of members of the panel up, which is Tom Glover as the country chair of RWE and Sinéad Obeng from Shell. Where's Sinéad? Do you guys want to come up and join us, and then we'll form into a panel? I think we should have the new panel members introduce themselves briefly before we kick off. Sinéad, would you like to go?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sinéad Obeng. I'm an environmental products regulatory manager at Shell. I've been at Shell for a year, but before then I've worked in a combination of commercial roles in upstream oil and gas to trading businesses. And I also got involved in interviews that were part of the middle management report. So I'm very happy to be here and share my thoughts.
Great, thanks, Sinead. Tom Glover, RWE's UK Country Chair, also a board member of Energy UK and a member of the Energy Leaders Coalition.
And we know Monica already. So we've got two members of the Energy Leaders Coalition whose work you've read about or will read about in the report. And we got Sinead to represent that sort of middle management tier that we've talked so much about, both in the BEIS report and also in the earlier panel. So again, we're still on the subject of how do we deliver change and why does it matter? We are also going to be seeking some questions from the audience and also from Slido. So again, if we can, I think it's refreshed. There is a question actually. Oh yeah, we'll come to that one. I think it's for you, Monica. Yeah, so if you got a Slido, if I don't know how many people are listening online, but hi, by the way, you know, if you've got questions, stick them in Slido and we'll come to the audience in a minute. But just on that, as sort of, you know, this macro point about sort of how do we deliver change? Why does it matter? Sinead, do you have any opening thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, I would say to open, it's quite challenging after the last session was amazing. But I think particularly in the lens of an energy crisis that we're currently undergoing, the current crisis is impacting everyone, all sections of society. And it makes sense that as an energy industry and professionals working in it, that we ensure that we're reflecting all of the solutions that affect different parts of society, whether that's looking at the ways in which communities in other parts of the world that are impacted by climate change can have the right financing, climate financing to be successful and to protect their communities, or from the everyday person that you know, tries to get to work by car and is in social housing. Obviously, they're not going to have access to some of the more innovative solutions that we're talking about to try and meet the transition. And I think all of those things really require diverse teams with different perspectives, so we can be a lot more realistic and a lot more successful when we're going about our day-to-day work.
Very good. Tom, do you have any sort of initial thoughts?
I kind of agreed with Monica's statement. She said before, I don't think we need to talk about why anymore, why we need diversity. If we're on that question still, it's a bit weird.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
I would say, but I'm going to just say one comment on it, because funnily enough, as probably there's only two people in here actually wearing a tie, which kind of tells you how less diverse we are here. But it's not for this meeting. I could have come all trendy, but it's for my next meeting. But which might say something about that meeting more than this one. But funnily enough, as another white middle-aged guy, I've sat on boards that have been 100% white middle-aged men, and my most recent board was 50-50, and it was 3 ladies and 3 gentlemen, 3 nationalities, and the discussions we had at that board were by far the best. We had some right old bish bashes on that board. But you know what? The result was much better because we had a real diverse opinion. And the reason why we kind of went at it like that is because they had different opinions at the table, and that's only going to end up with a better result at the company level. Whereas on the boards that have been, the previous board I was on, I can't be too, a previous board I was on, I can't be too specific. It was like, you know, you went on the table and it was a bit like the example of, I said something and I'd go, yeah, Tommy's pretty right. Yeah. Conversation done. It was really easy as a board member, but perhaps wasn't the right challenge. And then I think so hopefully we get past the why, and I think then it all becomes to real action that real people do, and we maybe go through some examples of that. Yeah,
well, you got a case study I mean,
that's a great case study because it's not something that I did. Right. And I think that's almost like the best. If you look at the case study, it's about what one of our volunteer groups did. So it was our diversity and inclusion panel in RWE Generation. And they just found a gap and basically said, you know what we're finding is we're not getting support for life events. So things that happen. I mean, we talked about some of them, whether that be menopause, whether it be divorce, whether it be bereavement, whether it be et cetera. And what the volunteer group did, obviously with support of the company, was set up a whole site with research for life events. And so basically employees can just go on there and there'll be advice about bereavement, there'll be advice around menopause, there'll be advice around whatever. And it will not only just be, it's not company advice, by the way, it's not RWE's got a really good view on this kind of stuff, but it's like links to proper organizations that can do it, really good advice that helps people go through it. And I think that kind of like helping people with their life events, you know, that quite often affect women more than they affect men, to be honest, and quite a lot of them really helps them go through that process. So that was the case study that we put forward.
That's great. And there's some great case studies in there. Strikes me though that, you know, case studies are great, right? Good anecdotes, but this target that we set, the pace is still, you know, however described, glacial or otherwise. It strikes me that, I don't know, maybe some of these targets are seen as a little bit more discretionary than some of the other targets. If earnings targets or safety targets were not met in businesses, maybe CEOs would get fired. You know, we just missed the diversity target by a bit. Oh, never mind, we tried pretty hard. Is there something that's seen as a bit more discretionary here, that these targets are not as important? Is there something we can do to raise their importance? What do you think, the CEOs on the panel?
I think what we need to consider is what gets measured gets delivered. Yeah. And we all know that that's absolutely true. And so if we don't make these targets that are linked to either financial performance, board performance, then they won't be taken as seriously and by comparison to other more financial driven targets. But then you come back to actually, why are we doing this? So where we started this conversation, why is it important to all of us? And if we don't believe that, to your point, Tom, that actually we should, you know, we don't need to talk about it anymore because we'll get that it's important, do we? Because if we really did, then actually we would be on that road and we would be delivering it, and we wouldn't be having a conversation about targets. We've committed to targets. Some of the biggest organisations in our industry are committing to them. And there are lessons that I believe we can learn from other organisations. If you look at Virgin Atlantic, I don't know if you've seen that case study recently, but they have changed their gender policy. So they've actually changed the policy, and then the articulation of that policy has been through their uniforms and the fact that you can wear whatever you like from the selection of uniforms that are available. They have increased their talent attraction by 100%. And so the results have flowed as a result of the commitment that they've made to that policy. And so I think where there is a will, there is a way. And so if you do link it back to some of those more pointed, harder targets, then actually that's when you start to see that real traction.
Yeah, it's a great point. Tom, do you lose your job if you don't hit your diversity target?
No, I know. I'll be honest. And maybe also this is Monica's point around, you know, how it comes back to how far in the organisation people think it's valuable as well. So what we've got in RWE, we've got an absolutely fantastic executive board population now. So we're at 40%. I think every executive board has at least one female on it. It's not diverse in other areas. So we've got 20 countries we operate in, but only 4 nationalities on board. Guess what nationality is the most predominant in a German-based organisation? So we're not diverse in other ways, but actually at that level, it's really measured and really talked about. But we did this, somebody talked about before about making sure it's realisable. And we all sat down as OpCo boards and we actually said, if we did a little bit extra, what realistically could we get to? We didn't set stupid targets. So I think at that exec-co and what we call it N-1, but basically the one below the board, we're kind of getting there. But I think it comes back to maybe you're right in your comment that maybe it's not understood lower down or prioritised enough. And certainly, although we have these targets as a group to get to our quotas and our targets, actually, you're fully right. I don't think anybody would get called out as much as if they lost £1 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just, maybe it's a culture within our company, but we're not there yet. We're definitely not there. It's not called out as much.
Okay. These microphones are very impressive, by the way, aren't they? So it makes you feel like you're in the UN. More sanctions for Russia. Anyway, that's a different conference on a different day. Yeah, sorry, I've got off on one. I do this all the time.
At that one.
Sinead, the other theme for today, I think, has been Maybe it's sort of seen as a little bit easier right at the top of the organisation, you know, to get women onto boards. There's been a lot of focus on that, getting measured, and even actually at entry levels in organisations, there's typically now for graduate entry or, you know, apprenticeships and things. It's this middle management tier that we've now started to focus on, and we've heard a bit about this delivery gap from the BEIS report, etc. Powerful Women BEIS report, I should say, Powerful Women. What's your perspective on how well companies are tackling D&I issues at that sort of middle management tier?
I think to steal some of the points that were raised earlier, I think it shouldn't be underestimated the amount that middle managers have going on, whether it's workload or going off to have children or wanting to engage in further study. I think all of those are perceived to have compromising consequences on the careers of middle managers. In some ways, it's quite interesting when I think people compare bringing in grads and board level appointments, because I think they're quite similar in the sense that when you have a board level appointment, you look at someone's experience on quite a high level basis. And similarly with university grads, they're pretty much all on the same page. And as long as someone performs, you know, pretty well in an interview, it's a lot easier to kind of make sure that your pool of students that you're looking at and the students you hire has a little bit more equality. I think on the middle management side, often you're seen as an expert in your field, and we don't talk a lot about transferable skills within the middle management. So a lot of companies will focus on bringing in kind of graduates and using that as their talent pipeline for the future, but then you still have a skills gap in the middle, and that's going to present itself, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years, when we have a lack of kind of diverse experience going to leadership positions. So I think it would be great to see more acknowledgement of transferable skills in middle managers. Not everyone is just a one-trick pony. I think despite someone having great expertise, seeking what else they can do, seeking what other experiences they have, I think could really help kind of pull more opportunities in that group.
Fantastic.
I would say, comment on one of those. I recently did an interview for a director in one of our companies, and you talk about transferable skills and giving them to them. All the candidates, every single candidate had like 10 years in a kind of linear management. You know, they started as a junior, gone to manager in a very linear fashion. And I was quite disappointed with our organization that we hadn't done, there was nobody broad. And that role, that director role, was quite a broad role. And yet everybody applying was really linear. So I think it's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the other themes from this morning that struck me, again, Sarah summed this up well. She said, you know, we've got tough and important sort of issues. So we're looking for somebody that looks tough and important. It was classic. But I think there is this, organizations can have this stereotype of what they see as talent. You know, this sort of confident person with gravitas or something. You know, there's one definition of it. And that sort of led me to sort of think that actually a lot of company processes are probably biased towards that sort of perspective. You know, so you know, obviously for promotions, you typically put yourself forward. Talent programs, sometimes they're people who sort of volunteer and put their arm up. Again, it would tend to favour this sort of stereotype coming through. I mean, does that resonate at all with you? And do we need to fix some of the processes in our organisations to avoid this kind of stereotypical view of talent?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think if you think about the year-end review process, it's actually not necessarily set up to ensure people succeed, because you're kind of waiting for someone to collect all the great things they've been doing and then put it all forward in this self-promotion. And perhaps not everyone feels able to do that. And so then it's about, well, who's actually promoting themselves the best in order to try and progress through the organization. And it doesn't necessarily happen at the highest level or the lowest level in that respect, because those people are where that's where you're kind of entering into the organization, so on boards or kind of entry level positions. And so you don't find that in the same way. And something that I've reflected on recently and taken a great deal of consideration around is thinking about how we structure meetings and conversations. And so in our middle management teams in So Energy, we have more men than women. We are working on that, but at the moment the balance isn't quite there. And so quite often the women are marginalized when they come into those conversations. And you'll find that some of the kind of typical characters, some of those stronger people with stronger opinions, will be the ones that are giving their views and talking. And so if I go in and say, actually, I'd like to discuss a topic, something that's bothering me, can we have a chat about it? Then I'll know exactly who the individuals that will be speaking up, and I'll know which are the ones that don't, and it'll be the women that don't. And that's a generalization, but it happens. And so actually the way that I've adapted what I do is I send out a pre-read. I send information so that they can be more considered and reflect and prepare in advance of the conversation. So then when I bring people together, it's the playing field has been leveled to a certain extent. Now you still are dependent on people being invited forward or putting themselves forward to have those conversations. But if I pick on the women, their answers are thoughtful and considered, and so they can do it. But they don't always feel, for whatever reason, in a position to be able to do that. So we have to create these environments where they do feel like they can fully participate. And that is, again, coming back to leadership and the environment that we create.
Yeah, I really like that example of sort of sending the stuff in advance and having more considered view. Tom, have you come across this?
I would be all the time, like almost, I think, I mean, you do need to put in initiatives to sort it out. So the one that we have is like, you know, very biased job adverts, interviewing processes, etc. And I'm sure a lot of you use these programs, right, where you can write a job advert and then you can put it into a computer program and it will tell you whether it's a biased advert or not, you know. And I've done it myself, and then you come back with these word changes that make quite a subtle difference. I would never have picked it up myself, but can make quite a difference to how people see it. And so what we're doing is institutionally, we're rolling out inclusive recruitment. So full day courses for anybody involved in recruitment, whether that's the manager or HR business partners, whatever. They've got to go on a day's course to basically do some inclusive recruitment. And then I've got like some really personal examples. And this is, again, a generalist, I apologize, a generalization. But what I notice is if you get an advert and you say, right, this is what the person should be able to do, right? And I'm going to really generalize now. Typical man will go, yeah, I can do that. Oh yeah, those three, yeah, I'll be able to wing that. I'll apply.
Wing it.
Right. And then I have some females that I mentor, and then they're like, well, I can't do it. And I'm like, well, I think you can do it. Well, I'm not going to apply it, but I think you should apply. And trying to get them to think they should apply is quite interesting, just because you put in that should. Now, if you put ideally or, you know, should include, suddenly you'll have a whole load different of adverts. And I think it comes back to me, I think you talked about like somebody with like massive confidence and tends to be the person that gets promoted. But actually then you're not putting much diversity, then you've just got a load of alphas in the boardroom or in the directors. So, but you do have to institutionalize it. So we're doing that in our group business, our offshore business now, and we will roll it out, no doubt, into the other operational businesses. So full day, if you're going to recruit, you've got to have done inclusivity training.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah.
Sinead, is there something that you've sort of had to think about consciously as you've sort of trying to climb the ladder, you know, think about, because we've been talking about bring your authentic self to work, but if you have to make yourself this stereotypical person to get noticed, you had to change your kind of style and behaviors to sort of, you know, get noticed?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say it's from my personal experience so much changing my style and behaviors, but you know, going back to what Monica was talking about in terms of who would speak up in the room during meetings and things like that, I've often found, and it's increased as I've got more responsibility in my role, but if I'm arriving and showing up at a meeting, because I look young, apparently, the assumption is that, okay, that's just a graduate. So like, let's just not bother to introduce them or think about what their perspectives are. And I spoke to a friend about this that works in HR in a diversity role. And she looks great for her age. She's almost 40. And she shared with me that she has the same experience. So I asked her, well, what do you do about that? And she gave me a tip, which for me is really bold, But she said, as soon as I walk into a room and everyone's doing introductions, I'm going to talk about everywhere I've worked, what I've done, for how long, so they can quickly do the maths. And then you kind of automatically command that respect. And it's a shame that I have to do that. So every time I kind of, I'm ignored or spoken over, it reduces my incentive to actually want to speak up and contribute. And it's crazy because there are points where I look at myself as a graduate and I was way more confident about sharing my ideas, but every single time there was just someone speaking over me or, just kind of being dismissed and assumed to not have much experience and assumed to not know my craft. You end up withdrawing a bit, which is a shame. So I think it's really important, those behaviors that you picked up on and that you're doing something about, I think that's so powerful. It'll make a huge difference.
How many people, I'm curious, have been asked to take minutes in a meeting or make a cup of tea just because you're the only woman? And it's ridiculous, isn't it? And so one of the things that I always do, if you ever come to So Energy, I will make the tea and I will do it with one of my male colleagues and we will do it together. And it kind of just levels everything, because if I'm making the tea, then it just becomes something that I do and that everyone does together. And we rotate minutes. And so these are some of the very small things, but if you start introducing some of these things, it becomes culture. And that's how you tackle it, right?
I never let anybody make me a tea.
Well, very good at making tea.
Because I like it stirred 32 times to the left with 3 grains of sugar. But no, I think it's easy to fall in. Seriously, it's easy to fall into that. And when I visit operational sites, I would always wash up whatever I use and sort of put it away, and they sort of look at me aghast as if normally you just leave all this stuff for us to tidy up. And
how many hands went up?
I know it's a shocker. Talking about hands up. Question. Yeah, it's right in there. Get in. I think we might have a mic. Do we have a roving microphone so people can hear online? Oh, thank you. Slido.
Thank you. My question is around supplier diversity. It always seems to be the elephant in the room, and we know there's so many positive outcomes when it comes to forging new relationships, driving innovation, extended networks, and community growth. So I guess, what are you doing as CEOs to increase supplier diversity in your supply chain?
Tom, Monica?
Yeah, that's a
good question.
It's an amazing question, and I honestly think, in terms of gender diversity, nothing. Right, just to be really honest. So we're doing a hell of a lot as an offshore business and a renewable business about local supply chain. So trying to encourage smaller businesses, SMEs locally. The offshore business has a 60% target to go local business, and we spend a lot of time with supply chain hubs. We sponsor one in the Northwest, and so we do that. And we do kind of like the indirect supply chain of when we do college education, making sure that's diverse. But to be honest, I'm not aware, and I'm not the expert, so I'm not a procurement expert, but I don't believe we actually do anything. So it's a very good point, and it's hard to admit it, but I don't want to lie. I don't think we do anything on asking our suppliers how diverse they are in order to pre-select them. It's a good question. I will take it away and ask as well, by the way.
Monica, anything?
No, fairly similar actually. I mean, it's a brilliant question. I think the way that we tend to view our suppliers are as extensions of our businesses. So you're absolutely right that what we champion for ourselves, we ought to be looking at as part of that process. So I think it's a fair challenge.
Monica, the top question on Slido is for you, I think, from Anonymous. Anonymous is very active on also always on our calls as well. Who is this person? Anyway, now you had sort of time to reflect, how would you have answered the man that missed you out now if you had another situation, because this person's anonymous? I've had this a few times and wished I'd said more. Now, I'm hoping you're not going to take your daughter's advice.
No, but if I share another example, and as you can imagine, I spend a lot of time in these male-dominated environments, and there was one interaction where a couple of chaps were talking about Friday night, going for a beer, and it was kind of like, oh, I'm going out for a while, and I did say, oh, is anyone invited to this? You know, beer and kebabs, can I come? And the jaws dropped at that moment, and it was like, yeah, of course. And so then we had a conversation about where we all lived and where was the meeting up. Now the event didn't happen, but I think unless you actually interject and you do point out these things, and so I have become more conscious about it. And I think so on a Sunday morning when I'm watching my son play rugby and they ask for nominations for player of the match, will I get asked? Not always. So it's not just exclusively in a work environment.
No.
Unfortunately, this does happen to women all the time.
Yeah.
So I will put my hand up and I will put myself forward. To your point, it is exhausting when you have to continuously do that. But unless you do that when you're in a position of leadership, which is a great privilege, then others won't do it either. And then you don't see that ripple effect of everyone being in a more open, inclusive environment.
I was going to go on an example. We discussed it actually in a pre-brief of somebody shouting it out and being effective. So I went to a select committee on the Celtic Sea, which is like an offshore thing, and didn't think anything about it. And you get asked to attend, right? So you don't get. So if you go to a conference, you would refuse nowadays to attend if it wasn't a diverse. But you get invited to attend, and we all walked in. It was four white middle-aged bloke and a female MP went, "Where are the women?" Straight away shouted out, which I thought was very good. And the embarrassing thing is our head of Celtic Sea is a woman, our head of development is a woman, our head of supply chain for Northwest is a woman, and yet we put the middle-aged man, right? So we could have actually identified it had we thought about it beforehand. So I think it does work to shout it out, because it made me, going in there, honestly, I just wasn't thinking. And then as soon as she shouted it out, I was like, oh shit, yeah. Yeah, so I would shout it out. Yeah, because you don't, it's a bias, right? It's a subconscious bias. I didn't think about it, but when somebody shouts it out, then next time I'll think about it. So you should shout it out.
And what's funny, when I talk to my organisation and we have an all hands meeting, and I remind them about the work that we're doing with powerful women and the fact that I'm the only female CEO in retail, I get cheered and I feel quite embarrassed about it. But actually, the people are cheering because of what I have achieved and the status and my ability to influence. So actually, whilst I probably would have called out to that chap, actually, why did you do that? Talk to me about that and try to educate him, whether that would have had any impact. But I think it is our responsibility to tackle these things, however uncomfortable it makes us feel.
Yeah, I think you need to kill a put down, don't you?
Yeah, like a line.
I
would have done it.
Maybe we should start, you know. Oh, there's
suggestions.
There's a hand at the back. I think that, hang on, I think it's a man.
It is. So hi, I'm Neil, by the way.
Hi, Neil, by the way.
I've heard the word resilience mentioned a couple of times this morning, and I personally recoil from the word resilience. I think it's a word, in my experience, which comes from a place of trauma very often. And I'd be interested to get your view on the use of the word resilient and why we expect colleagues to be resilient. And I would respectfully suggest that maybe we start to think about resourceful instead of expecting our colleagues to be resilient. I'd be interested on your view, please.
Really, really interesting question. Wow. What do you, Sinead?
Yeah, I can kick off with that. I've never heard that perspective on resilience, and I think that's really interesting and quite powerful, because you're right, it does give the connotations that you have to put yourself through suffering repeatedly. From my perspective, I feel that I have to have resilience to go to work, because there is going to be something that pops up that's going to be a pain. I'm going to have to navigate some, unfair communication styles, or point out something that was my idea, which is ridiculous. And I think I don't have the tools to know how to navigate those situations. without having to be resilient, as you say. So I think that leads me to my next point, is that I would ask kind of both of you as leaders in your organizations, you know, when you do have colleagues and you are sending diverse people to meetings or to meet clients or to represent your businesses, how do you equip them for those situations that they have to navigate? Because sometimes it's beyond your control, and it can be externally, it can be another country where they have different cultural norms. And I think once we start equipping each other in different kind of environments, then, you know, we can be really powerful and really successful.
Yeah, it's again another fantastic question. When we think about resilience, think about it in the context, talk about customer for a minute, think about the energy crisis, the fact that we've got 8 million homes in fuel poverty, we've got customers calling into call centres where they are often in very desperate situations. So within our business, actually, that you're right, that resilience refers to trauma, because we are dealing with traumatic situations, customers that cannot pay their energy bills. And so we have a whole program that is wrapped around that supports colleagues through wellbeing. And so as an organization, one of our values is caring, and about how we care for our people in order to equip them to do their jobs well. And we do provide them with the tools within which to do that, and wrap that around our employees. I think that I've got a really, really relevant person that I've got in my mind that is going into our group board in a couple of weeks, who is representing our entire business going into a situation that could be deemed as quite anxious for them. And I've personally spent quite a lot of time with them to help prepare them for that. And so they will be in a minority. But do we do that consistently well across the board for every interaction? No. And I think where we need to get to is that becomes normalized, so that we don't need to do that. So perhaps there is a step in the interim whereby we have to do that and wrap those support around individuals. But then you come back to, actually, everyone is on a unique and individual journey, and something will be going on with everybody. And so we need to treat people as humans, with humility, with empathy, and then provide them with what is right for their individual situations, irrespective of their gender or their circumstances, so that they can be successful in their roles. And that comes back to your values as an organisation and how you instill those within your people. And then you come back to great leadership. So it's kind of cyclical around all the topics that we've talked about today.
Tom, any thoughts on the resilience word? Actually, that's really resonated with me. That's a really good point.
I would really like a few days to think about it. Actually, that's how I kind of went a bit last, to kind of really think, what do I really think? And I'm going to say what I kind of feel here as a gut reaction, but I probably would spend more time to ponder on it, because it's a good question. I mean, I do think there is a requirement for a certain amount of resilience, and I'm not just saying for gender, just generally in life, right? Yeah. Life is going to throw all kinds of shit at you, no matter where you come from, and work will do it as well. And I think so. You do need a bit of resilience. I think what we're pointing out is you shouldn't have to have too much resilience, and individuals shouldn't have to have more resilience than others because of their background or circumstances. So I think for me, resilience is required, unfortunately, because things will go wrong, and you need to be able to do, whether in business or your personal life. So I would say it's very important, resilience, but I like the word, it's more like to be resourceful. So hopefully we are giving people resources. So we keep resilience requirement to the lowest, but you'll need some, and we give them the resources to deal with it. And then your question was quite specific, which is, what do you do? I mean, obviously there's the ongoing training and support and mentoring that we give throughout developing all our people. And then specific circumstances, I think managers will give people specific support. We don't have I don't think a general answer. And then we also have the support if the worst goes wrong, right? And I don't want to talk about that because you should never get there. But within RWE, we have a very big wraparound wellbeing support where we have wellbeing coaching available, helplines for all employees. If you kind of get beyond what you shouldn't get, hopefully we don't get there. But that's a bit waffly answer. It's that would take a lot of thinking about to get to the right answer and to phrase it correctly, I think.
Something that's just prompted a thought in my mind that one of my management team, she told me that she was pregnant, before going on maternity leave now, and we sat down and she was telling me the news, I was delighted for her. I mean, it's having a baby is really exciting and it's something that should be celebrated. And she said at the end of it, she said, gosh, I was really nervous about telling you. And I was like, were you? And it was almost like that moment I thought I'd failed her, because she should have felt excited to share her news with me and not worried about what the consequence of that news was going to deliver, right? And I am somebody who has been through lots of scars. I think to the point that was made in the earlier panel around, you know, women championing other women and lifting them and being empathetic because of the experiences and all of the very, very difficult experiences that I've had through my career and the scars that I wear. And it does feel like things have moved on. And I try and be a different type of female leader as a result of that. But in that moment, she still felt nervous. Now, maybe being nervous was a completely normal reaction, but actually I would have felt far better that she felt comfortable and excited and wanted to talk about her plans for returning back to work and all the things that she wanted to do and felt safe enough to do that. So it comes back to that culture point around how you create the environment.
Very good. There's some bizarre words actually, but people say, oh, I've fallen pregnant. What? Should be celebrating it, you know. So like, yeah, anyway. We've probably got time for one. Oh, a very strong hand going up there saying, pick me, so I will. I was going to go back to anonymous, but now I don't have to.
Thank you. So, hi, I'm Katie. I work in the DE&I team at BP. Thank you for sharing your stories and perspectives with us today.
Welcome.
My question is around majority groups. So how are you engaging with majority groups in your organisation around roles and expectations of these goals, but also around consequences if there seem to be, or they are sabotaging these goals?
I mean, so actually we're not doing anything constructively, but actually so far so good. I mean, we're not actually I don't actually see any evidence in our organization that people are against any of the initiatives that we're doing, but maybe I haven't dug deep enough or whatever else. But yeah, it's so far so good, I would say, but maybe I'm not looking deep enough.
I think the single biggest thing that we can do is actually with the training that we provide, whether that be conduct training, unconscious bias training, ensuring that that's across the board in order to address this issue around education. And that links back to, again, the company values that we have and the way in which we expect people to behave, and calling out where we don't see those behaviours. So that I think that training piece for me is the most significant thing that we are currently going through, but I think it's an evolution and it's a journey depending on where you are on that journey to achieving those targets and what's needed based on kind of the baseline that you're starting from, and that will be different for every organisation.
You know, go ahead.
So if I may come in on that,
of course.
Loads of organisations have trainings, and you know, you join a company and you do your D&I online course and you do it quickly because the deadline's coming up. And the example of I don't know, unconscious bias will be something really obvious, to the point where, you know, anybody will obviously get the answer right. And I think when it comes to training, there needs to be kind of an additional layer of scrutiny and assessment when it comes to educating everyone, as well as majority groups as well. For instance, the way we speak about microaggressions, I only really understood microaggressions last week because, you know, I was away on a strategy day and we had someone come and talk to us about microaggressions. And the reason why I say I've only just understood them correctly is because there's this misconception that microaggressions, you know, can be, you know, not by accident. And I think that things like microaggressions, unintended microaggressions, as well as unconscious bias as well, but subtle unconscious biases. For instance, you know, I get all the time, oh, you're really well spoken. That's a really nice thing to say, but it appears as if it's surprising that I'm well spoken. Why is it surprising? Like, I'm just from the South, like from Brighton, that's how I speak. So I think training's great, but we really need to make sure that our training is impactful and actually delivers what we want it to deliver.
I mean, I think this is the delivery gap, frankly. You know, we toss these initiatives out there. People at the top of the organization say, I've done my bit. You know, we've put the training in, and mandatory training, as you say, you know, hit breaking news. There's good, bad, and indifferent in all walks of life, right? So when it gets into that middle management population, some people will pick it up enthusiastically and some people just won't. And there has to be more measurement. There has to be more kind of checking that things are actually getting delivered, because otherwise it just evaporates.
But there is, I mean, we've talked about there is no silver bullet, right? And that it's a package of things that needs to be delivered. And we've talked about the word consistency as well. But you do have to start somewhere. And so I think that education piece becomes really important too. I think Cordy talked about it in the last ELC meeting around National Grid introducing actually that microaggression training across their organisation and the impact that had had. If you do that in isolation, that's not going to be a silver bullet in itself, but actually if you combine that with a D&I strategy that addresses everything at every level of the organisation. But if you really want to tackle it, then you need longevity to those plans. You need to be really strategic in the way in which you embed that within your organisation. You can't just do it as I'm going to add this on. Actually, culturally, you have to have an environment where that can be successful, and also be open to the fact that, okay, so we tried that, it didn't quite work out in the way that we thought it was going to, so we're going to try something else, and we're going to get the feedback on that and evolve it so that it becomes an iterative process, which is the same as with all walks of our business.
Indeed. I am conscious we are probably running over at this point, Adam, but I just want to go back to one final question from Anonymous, who's very perceptive. And this is a good one, right? So do you find that D&I events and initiatives are always attended by the same demographic, and that the people who never attend are actually missing the message, or the ones that we, so in other words, we're preaching to the choir, right?
Yep.
So how do we get the message out more widely? We're all woke, right? Are you woke, Tom?
No, I don't think my kids would say that.
But how do seriously? How do we get the message out? Yeah,
it really. I'll give you an example. We had an absolutely fantastic diversity inclusion week last week. RWE and Rachel, who's here, our diversity lead, organised it. Thank you, Rachel and her team. And I did an absolutely amazing panel, and it was about forced displacement. And I had probably 4 of the most respected, very senior Ukrainian female executives to discuss what it's like to be forced displaced. 80 people, I think, dialed in. That's out of 12,000 employees.
All right.
80 people dialed in, right? And hopefully a lot more would do the recording and various other things. And I guess if I got them in the room, it'd be the same people who are part of the Women's Network, or part of everything else. So I think there is a real danger. And then I do think, and I know we're saying, well, compulsory training doesn't necessarily cut the mustard because you're doing it last minute, but there has to be some compulsory, like saying, I'm sorry, if you want to be a recruiting manager, you've got to do a days of inclusivity training. And yes, there'll still be, like you say, but the people who still don't get it. But hopefully they're the 20% and we hit the 80%. And, you've got the 20% that are always going to do it anyway, but you're starting to just grow the audience. So I think this is where, as a company, you have to do a bit of mandation. Otherwise, it just will be the same people turning up. Yeah.
Very good. I think we're possibly out of time, are we? I'm looking at Georgina saying yes. That's a pity. But really great conversation. I'd like you to thank panel and usual. In fact, Monica likes cheering. Lunch is served. Is that right? Thank you.